Okay, so I'm going to call the public hearing to order. Is that you? Thank you. They call the
Wasn't me.
if you have your laptop on in the room, you have to mute it. Okay, everybody's muted. Good. Okay. Otherwise, it sounds like a
I was
stadium.
falsely accused.
Otherwise, sorry.
Steve told you.
Otherwise, it sounds like a stadium here. We don't want it to sound like a stadium. We have several bills on our agenda today for public hearing, and we look forward to a good day of hearing public testimony. We'll start in. The first person on the sign-in sheet is Representative Cheeseman. Good morning and welcome to the Higher Ed Committee again.
Indeed, good morning. Chairman Slapp and Haddad. I don't see our ranking members, but distinguished members of the committee. And
I'll tell you that
Are they-
our ranking members are online.
Are
and
they
watching very
virtual?
attentively.
Okay.
Yes, right.
well, I will say hello to them as well, and everyone who is here and virtually. And I don't know what I did. I should go buy a lottery ticket today because I got number one in this draw. Maybe I'll win Powerball. Anyway, I want to thank you for having me here today to submit testimony on House Bill 6567. I feel like it's Groundhog Day all over again. I've testified on this bill or similar ones several times before. And you have my written testimony, but I'd like to use someone else's words to make the case for this bill. And these are the words of Frederick Douglass from his plea for freedom of speech in Boston. And this followed an episode where a group was meeting to call for the abolition of slavery, and the meeting was broken up by violent individuals. And the mayor of Boston refused to protect that right to free speech. And I'm not going to read the whole speech, but I'm going to read what I think are the most salient parts of it from someone who I think recognized, treasured, and would give his life to preserve free speech. No right was deemed by the fathers of the government more sacred than the right of speech. It was in their eyes, as in the eyes of all thoughtful men, the great moral renovator of society and government. Daniel Webster called it a homebred right, a fireside privilege. Liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions has ceased to exist. That of all rights is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. Slavery cannot tolerate free speech. 5 years of its exercise would banish the auction block and break every chain in the South. Equally clear is the right to hear. To suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the right of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. It is just as criminal to rob a man of his right to speak and hear as it would be to rob him of his money. I have no doubt Boston will vindicate this speech. But in order to do so, there must be no concessions to the enemy. When a man is allowed to speak because he is rich and powerful, it aggravates the crime of denying the right to the poor and humble. And as we ask that our public universities put among their requirements a policy regarding free speech, it sends a message. It sends a message to the people who work there. It sends a message to the students there that the role of the university is to enable and encourage free, civil, and respectful dialogue. that the right to utter opinions with which others disagree must be protected. We see this in our hallowed chambers where we debate on the floor powerful, conflicting ideas, but we do so in a civil way, in a respectful way, in the hope that the power of our speech and those ideas will persuade, will overcome speech with which we disagree, that our ability to argue and debate even ideas which we find distasteful is so vital and so important that our universities should be required to say, we stand behind this. These are our policies and we will defend them, and they matter to everyone on campus. So with that, I'd like to conclude my remarks. I thank you so much for taking this up, and I hope this year we'll get it across the finish line because I do think it is vitally important. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm looking online and in the room. I see Representative Haynes has a question for you. Representative Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say I don't have any questions for the good legislator, but I just wanted to thank her for her role in bringing this forward every year. It's, you know, it's so important that we encourage the, as you put it, the free and civil dialogue of our hallowed halls of education. If there was anywhere that this should happen, is in the halls of our higher education institutions. And I hope that through the work that you've done, as well as any other considerations this year, can make this a permanent good bill, and we get this across the finish line this year once and for all. So thank you again for bringing forward and your due diligence every year in the past.
Thank you very much, Representative Haynes. And I do hope, because Connecticut would join an increasing number of states that have asked this of their institutions of public learning, you know, Virginia, California, Florida, you know, all over the country. And I do think we should be among them because this does matter. And as I say, I think it sends a very important message to not only the people who work there, but the students there. This is where you're going to come and we're going to debate and do it civilly, but this really matters.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Slapp.
Great. Thanks for your passionate testimony. As a former journalist, there's, you know, I'm with you in terms of the importance of free speech so my question is do you have, and by the way, I don't want this question to sound like I'm challenging your premise, but I'm just wondering if you have examples of, you know, in Connecticut here on college campuses where you feel like, you know, free speech has not been permitted, or do you feel like this is more of a, you know, proactive?
Well, certainly I think on some of our private universities, we've seen that. Indeed, there was a recent incident at Yale, I believe in March, where speakers on free speech were shouted down and not allowed to speak. I think that's a concern, but I think it also applies. Are there disproportionate hurdles set up depending on the nature of the speaker who's being brought in? I think you have to ensure that a university is taking an even-handed approach. And I know there have been incidents I believe at UConn where greater hurdles were placed over one speaker than another. And I believe there are examples, particularly with relation to speech by professors, where there was not that recognition that free speech should be allowed. And I do think, again, it's important to send a message to students that this is an institution. These are institutions where we will defend the right to free speech, even when it's speech with which you disagree. And I think as we look at some of the surveys, perhaps, you know, one done by Knight Ridder, you do find students who feel that certain speech should not be allowed. And I think it does send an important message that the power of, you know, what we consider evil ideas and hateful speech can be overcome by strong arguments against. And that's how we debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Cooley.
Thank you, Chairman and ranking members. Thank you, Representative Cheeseman, for coming in, and I want to thank you for using that historical example from the issue of slavery and how important free speech was that. The basis of the republic we live in is based on free speech. We didn't just impose the Constitution. We had a vigorous debate over it with both the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, which tend not to be read by students today, but should be, to show the example of vigorous free speech in the debate in the marketplace of ideas that helped create our republic and constitutional system that we have today. So I just wanted to thank you for the historical reference as a historian and how important free speech is to the republic, especially moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cooley. And I think, and then I'll conclude because I know you have a lot of speakers. I think sometimes we do take for granted the existence of our enshrined First Amendment rights because many countries do not have this. I mean, the United Kingdom has no written constitution and their constraints on speech are much greater than we have here, I think to their detriment. So I think, as I said, you've obviously heard my passionate argument. I hope we can get this across the finish line because I do think this would be a valuable addition both to university policy, sending a message to students, and really put Connecticut at the forefront of saying we value this and we want to enshrine this in statute. So I want to thank you again.
Representative Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Representative Cheeseman, for your testimony and advocacy on this bill. Being on the Higher Ed Committee the last 4 years, I know we've heard a lot about it. And my first question was going to be what Senator Slapp asked. I wanted to know about, because I think of our public institutions here in Connecticut as places where a multitude of diverse issues and the freedom to express them are being displayed. And wanted to know a little bit more about, those examples and things that you've mentioned, you've heard where there have been some hurdles or problems. So that's good to know that there's a problem to actually solve here based on what you've heard. But my follow-up is the legislation, the way I read it, is requiring that a policy be set up regarding freedom of expression on campus. Would this bill, the way it's written, allow our public institutions to include in that policy parameters and perhaps exclusion of certain speakers on campus when they believe that speaker could bring a threat to the campus of some sort of, of violence based on maybe other speaking engagements that have occurred?
I think there would have to be an extraordinarily high bar. Simply because someone is coming to express ideas that some students may find, vile or disgusting, does not necessarily mean that there's going to be violence. If there had been a speaker who had been on other campuses or at other venues, and there had been a concerted effort to bring about violence and violence had actually resulted, then I think nothing in this would preclude the university from taking steps given a demonstrated threat to protect students. On the other hand, the mere fear that someone's presence on campus might inflame passions in itself, in my view, would not be enough for the university to say, oh, I'm sorry, we're not having you. I think there would have to be an extraordinarily high bar.
And I think that's fair that a high bar may need to be established based on previous events.
And I think, looking at some of the incidents, the violence has not come from, a right-wing extremist appearing on campus and having violence as a result of him or her speaking, but it's been in places like Middlebury College where Charles Murray was going to speak, and he and I believe the professor who had brought him on campus were physically attacked as they attempted to leave. So, I am, not saying one side or another is always going to be innocent or always going to be guilty. We have to operate under the assumption that there is going to be speech. It is going to be respectful. People will have the right to agree or disagree, but those differing views need to be heard.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question.
Are there any additional questions? I guess I'll just ask one. In the event that in the university's opinion or the college's opinion that they need to deploy security at an event for whatever reason, it could be because the speaker is a prominent politician, and or it could be because there's a history of someone who's like maybe who's deliberately tried to incite a crowd at a previous speech or something like that. But let's say that, the university and it determines that security measures are necessary. Would your bill impact who bears the burden of paying for the security?
I think at this point, my bill is agnostic on that, and my expectation would be the same criteria would be applied to any speaker, that it was not selected, and that, a real demonstrable need was there.
And is there guidance in the bill? I guess this is, now we're getting into the gray area,
Yeah.
real demonstrable need.
I would be
right?
happy to look at what other states have done in terms of addressing that. I don't think the bill specifically addresses that, but if that were a consideration, then certainly I'd be happy to collaborate and find out how other states have addressed this, because as I say, a number of them have put this into statute.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Harris had a question on
Oh, I'm sorry. I see now I turned my screen over to the actual bill. Now I got to go back here. Representative Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cheeseman, very good to see you today. Thank you so much for your testimony this morning. It's greatly appreciated. One concern that I would like to raise about the proposed legislation, and something that I think may be on the minds of many people that are becoming familiar with this legislation, is a case which is still up in the air around free speech. Now, I wholeheartedly believe, and I agree with you, that free speech is a constitutional right, that we should be able to exercise it at any point in time. But I would like to also caution that at times, certainly in our most recent history, that free speech has been used as a way to create and incite violence, as we've seen, for example, on college campuses such as Charlottesville, Virginia. I would just like to go a bit deeper and ask you one quick question regarding if there could be anything added to the bill, or anything that is already currently in the language that would protect students who are fearful of those who use the freedom of speech as a way to incite violence.
Well, I think no one would approve of using speech to incite violence. And I think the Supreme Court is very clear on this, that there is protected speech, and speech that is actually meant to incite violence and harm to others faces a different barrier. But I do think the intrinsic right of free speech needs to be protected. And we could talk about this for a long time, because you raise an important point. But as at the end of the day, simply the presence of someone whose speech you abhor on campus, I do not believe is something against students should or need to be protected. We are going to encounter lots of people during our lives, including people who harbor views with which we do not agree, who may voice those views. And it is only by engaging in debate and developing that ability to say, I am not going to let that speech harm me. Yes, if you're going to be physically attacked, obviously we're not going to permit that. But the mere presence and expression of speech we find abhorrent should empower us and inspire us to fight that speech with our ideas, and to engage other people to fight that speech with our ideas.
Thank you, Representative, for that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Cooley for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me a follow-up. As this debate is going on, Representative Cheeseman, may I conclude that your proposal is more in line with the Berkeley free speech movement of the 1960s that attempted to open up campuses to all sorts of speech so that we could have a vigorous debate on policies and concepts Am I correct in that
Well,
assumption?
to a certain extent, and the Chicago principles, which were embraced by the University of Chicago when they were seeing in the, earlier, in I think early 2000s and mid 2000s, that there were active attempts to silence speakers on campus simply because people disagreed with what they were saying, and that the role of the university is to enable, encourage, and engage in robust debate. Because that is the only way, that's the only way we can function in a civilized society, by opening up ourselves to different ideas. And sometimes you hear ideas, and I'm taking the violence, the incitement out of this conversation now. How can you learn if you don't listen to other ideas? How can you function as a human being if you say, I am only ever going to believe X, Y, and Z, and I am never going to make myself open to A, B, and C? I go into, listen in the chamber and go to public hearings, and I change my mind because of what I have heard. The power of someone's argument can move you, can make you open to things you never suggested. And isn't that a good thing? Do we want to say that I am born and I am only ever going to believe one thing? What my parents taught me, what my religion taught me, what my school taught me? Don't we want to be open to new ideas and talk to the people? I think part of the problem in this, part of the problem in this country is we never talk to the people with whom we disagree. We never engage with those with whom we disagree, and that divides us. That creates the toxic environment that we live in. Sorry, you're not supposed to cry at a public hearing, but I feel so strongly about this, that this matters as we move forward as a people, as a society. Sorry. As I say, you're not supposed to cry at a public hearing, but I do think it matters. It matters every day. And the message we send to our students is that don't be afraid of difference. Don't be afraid when you disagree with someone. Talk to them, because you might learn something new. You might change your mind, or you might change their mind. And that's why this legislation matters, and that's why I urge you to adopt it. And she gets herself under control. Sorry.
Thank you for that impassioned defense of free speech and intellectual engagement, which has been part of the country for years. And as a kid, I remember Dick Cavett having a slew of guests, and Buckley and Mailer duking it out, which was a great intellectual battle from both sides. And I'd like to see the universities and our colleges engaged in that kind of debate, because I think it's good for the Republic. And I really want to thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your testimony. And I've never seen a rule that says that you can't cry at a public hearing. We appreciate your passion and your vulnerability as well as you express that passion. So we appreciate that very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
very
your
much.
testimony. Next on our list of speakers is Representative Conley, who's joining us remotely. Representative Conley.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see our chairs, ranking members, and I believe the vice chairs are there as well. I'm here to talk.
Representative Conley, let me just ask you if you can either speak up or speak closer to your microphone. We're going to try to increase the volume in the room as well, but we're just having a little bit of trouble hearing you. But why don't you start over again, and we'll see if we can better hear you.
Okay, I hope this is a little better. I've moved my mic closer to me. Good morning to our chairs, our ranking members, our vice chairs. I'm here to talk about House Bill 5027, which is a pilot program for student health services for our branch campuses. And I chose our branch campus located in Groton, Connecticut, Avery Point. This bill is to ask for physical and mental health services for students enrolled at our branch campuses for UConn. The students at the branch campuses do not have access to student health services. And many of these students are from the county, but many students are from out of state as well who are attending the branch campuses, and therefore they don't have access to primary care that is conveniently located to them. A lot of the students at UConn Avery Point live in apartments, and many students carpool and have transportation issues. So finding time to go to a doctor can result in missed classes, and it can result in not the difficulties in accessing medical providers off campus can result in not being able to get their mental and physical health needs met. Now, UConn Avery Point does have some mental health for very short-term problems, but they don't have access to long-term providers. And as we all know, UConn Health is a great system for physical and mental health providers. And without an access or an entry point in, the students who are going to the branch campuses are often going to urgent care or going to a minute clinic and not having access to treaters. At our branch campuses, there's no place to go for something simple like a Band-Aid if you cut yourself. There's no place to go for a strep test. There's no place to go to pink eye or to get treatment for a UTI. Some of our very simple physical health needs without getting transportation to go off campus and make an appointment. And a lot of these students are, again, in urgent care, getting higher copays, dealing with deductibles for things that are very routine. I proposed something that where there could be a provider, maybe even APRN or a lower level provider, at least part-time on campus with hours that are noticed to students, so students can get access to healthcare on campus. And then if, of course, they needed to be referred out, they could get that referral that many of them need for their health insurance right from the provider on campus so that they could get access to good care quickly and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Conley. We share something in common, which is we both have campuses of UConn in our districts. What is not the same, of course, is that UConn in Storrs is a little bit bigger than Avery Point. Avery Point's a beautiful campus, though. I mean, I travel there pretty frequently, sometimes just with my family, and it's a beautiful campus. There's a, do you know what the current student count is of the number of students at Avery Point?
I can get that information for you. There are several hundred students, and while many of the students live in the close apartments, there's no on-campus housing at Avery Point. But some of the apartments are very close, walkable, bikeable, and able to get back and forth.
Thank you. I think you raise an important need for the student body that does attend Avery Point. And I know that there's a panel of UConn folks up next on our speaking order. And so you might want to stay tuned in to listen to what they have to say. Are there other members of the committee who have questions for Representative Conley? Seeing none, I'll thank you very much for your testimony. It's a good idea. We'll see what we can do with it, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up on our list is a panel of folks from UConn. I guess it's Suzanne Oronado, Anne Marie Seifert. I have Mark Overmeyer Velasquez, who I don't see in the room, but maybe he'll join us soon. Thank you. And you can, perfect. You can sit there and you can sit there. And if you want to just introduce yourselves before you speak and let us know what bill you're talking about and what you have to say. Thank you.
Good. You can tell I don't do this very often. Members of the committee, I'm Dr. Suzanne Onorado, the Executive Director of Student Health and Wellness at the University of Connecticut. And this testimony was created in partnership with Dr. Anne-Marie Seifert, who is the director of the UConn Avery Point campus. And as you mentioned, Dr. Mark Overmeyer Velasquez is the campus director of the Hartford UConn campus, and he is hoping to join us when he can. And he also contributed to this work. Dr. Anne-Marie Seifert and I were also the co-chairs of the UConn Task Force for Regional Campus Access to Care and Community Health. So near and dear to our heart. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the University of Connecticut for HB 5027, an act establishing a pilot program for student health services at the University of Connecticut campus located at Avery Point. The University of Connecticut has more than 30,000 students on its 7 campuses, of which a growing population of more than 7,200 graduate and undergraduate students attend the 4 regional campuses located at Avery Point in Groton, Connecticut, Hartford, Stamford, and Waterbury. Each regional campus adheres to the same rigorous UConn criteria and standards as the main campus in Storrs. While they also bring unique strengths to meet the district needs of their community, which also then requires, we believe, that they be supported by quality student support services. UConn Student Health and Wellness, also known as SHAW around campuses, offers coordinated services for students on the Storrs campus, as was mentioned previously, providing access to a full continuum of medical and mental health services, as well as preventative community health programs. These services are predominantly funded by a student health and wellness university fee, which is charged to all matriculated graduate and undergraduate students enrolled on the Storrs campus. Starting in 2017, UConn funded a Shaw Mental Health Resource Center on each of the 4 regional campuses, which provides mental health clinical case management, which basically means that it's an assessment of the student need and then a refer to treatment. Just very recently, within the last year, we also just added a 24/7, 365 days a year mental health support line in partnership with a national partner called Christie Campus. So that's also available to our regional students. And then UConn also funds 1 wellness educator shared between the 4 regional campuses. So one educator that visits all 4 campuses. In April 2021, UConn established a task force for regional campus access to care and community health to pretty much look at this exact question that's being raised. The task force was comprised of faculty, staff, students that represented all 7 campuses and kind of looked at the university system in order to review and assess regional students' medical and mental health needs and to recommend a model. So a model to address any gaps that may exist in care. And to achieve these goals, the task force analyzed national college health data, assessed UConn regional campus survey data that students participated in, and then we held focus groups on each of the regional campuses, which helped to inform preliminary recommendations made to the university. So the next steps in the process include administering an additional survey to the students during this semester, spring semester 2023, in order to measure evolving student preferences and needs for expanded health and mental health services on the regional campuses. Our first task force work was done right in the middle of the pandemic, so we want to confirm what needs exist currently before we move forward. UConn supports expanding access to medical care and mental health services for students on our regional campuses, but we also need to be concerned about or have a position related on not embarking on these kinds of endeavors without securing additional funding first. So the cost to launch and maintain this expansion would be significant, and our current funding structure would need to be absorbed by increasing student fees, as is the way we support the model on the Storrs campus. Expanded medical and mental health services are provided on our Storrs campus due to the larger student population, and the cost of expanding such services to our regional campuses would create a greater burden per student just based on the smaller populations. So this could have a disproportionately detrimental impact on affordability for our students attending the regional campuses. Students on the regional campuses experience a full range of medical and mental health needs, and advancing the level of healthcare of both the individual student as well as the campus community, we believe will ultimately contribute to the overall academic success of our students. But at the same time, we have the need to be mindful of maintaining a level of affordability that is valued by our students who attend regional campuses. We look forward to continued discussion on this matter, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide our point of view today. And we are very grateful to working with this committee as well as representatives in that region to try to move forward with this model. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just ask, I know you delivered joint testimony, but I just ask if Dr. Seifert had anything she wanted to add.
Thank you, Representative Haddad. I guess the first thing I'll do is answer your question. So current enrollment at Avery Point is 559 students, and those are all commuter students.
Thank you. And the Hartford and Stanford campuses are larger, right? I think it's maybe Hartford is maybe 1,500 or so students. Do you happen to know what that number is?
Depends how you count it. If you include the business school, School of Social Work, law school, it's more than 2,000. So, and then Stanford is around the same 2,000, 2,500,
Right.
and Waterbury's about 1,000.
Waterbury's 1,000. Okay.
But we could get you those exact numbers.
Thank you. No, I would appreciate it. Just a couple of other questions. You said that there's a fee assessed at stores. How large is the fee to provide services through Shaw?
So it's a prorated fee depending on how many credit hours you're enrolled in. But for students who are fully enrolled in the most credit hours, it's currently $343 per semester.
Right. And so part of your testimony says that that fee is not charged for students who are at the branch campuses, because they'll obviously get the services. But if you were to deliver services, certainly if you were to deliver the comprehensive set of services that delivered at stores, it would be much more expensive because the campuses are so small, and you're not getting any economy of scale.
Correct.
Right. Is there a reason though, if you were to extend, I'm just curious, is there a reason that anything would prevent you from charging a single fee to all students, and not having the full burden? I imagine at stores, students are charged the fee whether they use the services or not, right? So you made a decision there to charge a flat fee to students based on their number of credit hours, and then make services available for students, some of whom I suspect you see never, and many who you see frequently. And why would that same sort of model not work at the branch campuses? Meaning the student body would be asked to pay a certain fee for the provision of services at all of the campuses, rather than ask the regional campus to bear the full burden of the cost of providing the service at the regional campus.
I think that's what we're trying to weigh, is for the regional campuses that may have different access to care. And that's what we're trying to evaluate. Do they have access? How much? Who doesn't have access? Is that sort of model where everybody pays to contribute to certain needs that may be used more than other students? Is that a good value proposition? The other thing is there are things that are provided to all students on the STORS campus that is, so most people think if you have to come in the door to get medical care and mental health care, which of course is very valuable, but we also do provide quite a lot of interaction that creates a safe campus or prevention of illness and disease. So there is a benefit to all students. There's a differential benefit for students who use our services. And also at stores, again, because of economies of scale, we do bill insurance when we have a diagnosable mental health or medical condition. So we would have to look at all of those factors as we bring the models forward.
Thank you. And can you speak at all to any collaboration that you might have with your sister organization, UConn Health? I'm in Mansfield. I know Shaw is active on campus, but UConn Health has an urgent care and a primary practice facility just off campus, literally steps away. What sorts of collaborations occur between, these two institutions, both governed by the same board?
Yeah, we have quite a lot of collaboration. So one important one is that we have an agreement with the psychiatry department. And so they provide oversight and ability for us to bring things to a higher level when we need cases reviewed, as well as we have a fellow on site, a resident on site, 8 hours a week that's overseen by UConn Health, again, to provide that psychiatric level of care. We have psych APRNs, and so this just creates a new level. We also coordinate care with the urgent care center, so they are open when we're not. We have handoffs and conversations as students access the best resource at the right time. And then the specialty services downtown are great partners as well. So we don't do most specialty care through Shaw. So we have a great relationship and partnership to make sure students can get into those kinds of specialty cares. And then we do have other partners as well as we refer students out.
Thank you very much. I don't have any additional questions. Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I'll check online. No, not online. Let me just add if you could also, I know if the preliminary recommendations of the committee of the task force that you put together are available, but it would be helpful if we could, if you forward them over to the committee, it'd be good for us to take a look at as we consider the legislation moving forward.
Yes, I will get you all that information, but it's also on a website through UConn called Project Wellness. If you sort of scroll down on the right-hand side, it'll say the regional campus access to care and community health final report. But we can get that to you easily.
Great. Yeah, an email with a link would be terrific. Thank you very much. We
Perfect.
appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Neil Eskin, also from UConn. Same institution, different issue, right?
Good afternoon. Co-chairs, ranking members, and members of the committee. I'm Neil Eskin, Associate Athletic Director at UConn. Our Athletic Director, David Benedict, regrets that he could not be here today. I would like to thank the committee for its ongoing support of UConn and for the opportunity to provide testimony related to HB 5232, an act prohibiting public institutions of higher education from receiving money for introducing students to online gambling. The safety and well-being of our student body is paramount to the university, and we are mindful of this when the Division of Athletics engages in partnerships with corporate sponsors. As it relates to a potential partnership with an online gambling company, UConn would never allow for the direct solicitation of students. We are also mindful of our responsibility to achieve fiscal sustainability, progressing in that direction through record donor philanthropy and increased ticket sales. But we must continue to identify additional revenues, and partnering with new corporate sponsors is an effective way to accomplish that goal. We respectfully recommend that more specificity be inserted into this proposed legislation to define exactly what is desired, as the terms introducing and encouraging are somewhat vague. Please consider language which is focused on the direct solicitation of students, as it will accomplish the objective while not inhibiting institutions from partnering with a responsible firm. By doing so, we are appropriately distinguishing passive advertising from direct solicitation. Examples of direct solicitation include allowing a sponsor the use of a student email list, in a similar fashion to how a university in Louisiana operated recently, or an advertising campaign which targets students. UConn is categorically against these practices. Passive advertising is more typical and includes displaying a sponsor's logo on a variety of mediums in Arena, none of which specifically targets students. The Excel Center here in Hartford will soon house a sports gambling facility, which will be clearly visible to the many students who attend UConn games. Should the proposed bill prohibit us from accepting sponsorship money for in-arena advertising, it would create a somewhat curious juxtaposition. We firmly believe that the intent of this legislation is to prohibit online gambling companies from soliciting students directly, especially those who are not of legal age. If so, we ask that this be made clear in the final language, so we don't create an unintended consequence of limiting an institution's ability to generate much needed revenue. Thanks so much for your continued support of the university, and I appreciate the opportunity to share UConn's perspective on this matter.
Thank you very much for your testimony. The bill was proposed by a colleague of ours, Representative Morin Bello. who in fact did see the actions that were taken by that university that you mentioned in Louisiana, where direct solicitation was facilitated but for an online betting and gambling company enabled them to directly solicit the student body. And I think that that's really what motivated her to submit the legislation, and clearly her intent, which I think I think we agree is a good one in this case. I'll ask if there's any additional questions from members of the committee. I'm going to go this way first, Representative Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the chairman is correct from my understanding and what you mentioned in your testimony in regards of the intent and the direct solicitation, having spoke to Representative Morinbello and co-sponsored this bill. But you mentioned the passive advertising or solicitation that could go on. And I think you're right to be concerned if there's some sort of signage in the Excel Center, which is a multi-purpose center, that could cause, maybe this legislation would cause a conflict when there's a sports game there. But I think this legislation, and I think being more specific in the language could be helpful as it moves forward. I think, though, this legislation does intend to try to regulate some of that passive solicitation when it is only intended or primarily intended for students. So on the actual UConn campuses or any of our state colleges and universities, where there may be signage, around campus and ways of having that information directly in front of the students on a daily basis, I think is a concern, even if that may be considered passive. And I wanted to get your feedback on that.
Yes, that's a good point. And, we certainly agree with the spirit of what we're trying to do here, right? We're not trying to put it right in front of students, target students, et cetera. But I think, there's also a practical reality here that, the proliferation of these companies and advertising in this particular space is pretty immense right now. And, with the advent of state-sponsored gambling, these companies have grown. And, you can't watch a sports event on TV or listen to one on the radio without hearing some of this. So I think our point and the distinction we want to draw here is that, we don't think it's reasonable to hide students from reality and the reality of the functions of free enterprise and advertising that they're going to see on a regular basis. What we want to prevent, and we agree with the spirit of the bill, is directly encouraging students to bet. And that's what occurred in Louisiana in the situation I was mentioning. It was encouraging, it encouraged fans of that university, including students, to make a bet now. That's what we want to avoid. That's what we think the spirit of this is, not to hide students from the reality and what exists right now and advertising that they're seeing all the time. That's what I think the distinction is here.
Sure. And I agree with you on that. It is difficult to avoid these advertisements, and with, geo advertising and being able to have these advertisements right into social media channels students might use on campus. But I do think there's a distinction when the university is taking that money directly and allowing it on university property in perhaps a cafeteria or in on-campus sports arenas and gyms. It puts out the message that the university is endorsing this activity, which I'm not sure the university should take a position in, especially since you have to be 21 or older to gamble. And these individuals, for the most part on campus, many of them are not 21. So I think might be a distinction there that we should discuss further. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative from UConn, for being here. Continuing on basically discussion on distinctions. The Big East women's basketball tournament will be held at Mohegan Sun. Expect, of course, the UConn women to do very well. go UConn.
Thank you.
But holding where UConn is involved in conference play, tournament play, is there a possibility that the bill, if written the wrong way, could create problems for UConn in terms of its contracts with the Big East, if they're under contract with the Mohegan Sun, or any of the tournaments, preseason tournaments that are held elsewhere in the country that UConn goes to and helps fund our athletic programs, brings in revenue. Would those be in jeopardy if the bill is not written precisely?
Possibly to your point, and Mohegan Sun, which you mentioned, is a corporate partner of ours right now. So in addition to playing events such as the conference tournament there, we also play a regular season women's basketball game almost every year there. So more specificity is what we're encouraging to prevent those situations of inhibiting revenue opportunities from occurring. Very good point.
Thank you very much.
Senator Slapp.
Thank you and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So my question, and you may not know the answer at the top of your head, so if you need to get back to us, that's very understandable. But I think you draw an important distinction between kind of direct marketing or advertising solicitation of students and the indirect, right? If the students happen to be at the Excel Center or whatever.
Correct.
Does the university, right, currently do any direct marketing to students? I'm thinking maybe credit cards and when I say the university, or allow partners to do that. Do you know off the top of your head if that exists?
Senator Slapp, I probably have to check on that to make sure. We obviously market our events to students and encourage their attendance. That's really the space we exist in with students in terms of directly marketing and advertising them to attend events, to see their fellow students participating on the fields of competition. That's really where we do most of our work. But I'd have to double check to see where exactly that might occur, if it does occur, direct solicitation of students.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think in years past, there have been some reforms around. I mean, I remember being able to walk around campus, not UConn, but another one, where there's they're giving away T-shirts in order to sign up for credit cards, right? And it's let's get students credit cards. And I think people kind of took a second look at that and said maybe that's not necessarily a great idea. And we have other vices that are now legal in Connecticut as well that we might want to think about in terms of the role that these institutions of higher ed play, and either, to your point, keeping them away from students, and some of that is a fool's errand, but at least there's a line to draw. I think we probably all agree on. So and any information you could get on kind of current practices when
yes, I know there's not
very helpful.
Yes, there's nothing currently related. I do know there's nothing currently related to credit card business that is being solicited to students by athletics, but I certainly will double check if there's anything else out there that answers your question.
Great, thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions around what UConn currently is doing today. Are there any current advertisements that UConn, either athletic department or the university in general, is accepting from these, I would say, DraftKings, FanDuel, even the Connecticut Lottery, which is, I think, another conversation we need to have with us clarifying this bill if we want to, is, the Connecticut Lottery also provides online, gambling, also online, lottery ticket purchases. Do you currently have UConn in general have any direct affiliation with them in terms of accepting advertising dollars?
Not currently, but we have a multimedia partner that solicits sponsorships on behalf of the university. The same company does the same business with about 200 schools around the country, and they're always seeking new partnerships. And because this is a growing industry, they're certainly talking to people in this space. But to answer your question directly, no.
And you've not in the past either, right? At this point?
No, I think some years ago, there might have been something with the Connecticut Lottery that existed. In fact, I'm pretty sure it did, but not currently.
Okay. Yeah, because then I think that's great to understand. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it needs to, this bill, it's 4 lines right now. So it does definitely needs a little bit more meat behind it to understand and clarify, because I agree with Representative Turco, who said there's could be gray areas, right? We could be getting into areas where we want to make sure we clearly define, make sure the universities understand what they need to do, right? And make sure that it also doesn't prohibit them from going to places to actually play games. If there is not written properly, as Representative Cooley said, like you might not be able to go to the Big East tournament, right?
Mhm.
That would be detrimental to the university. So I think this has great understanding and why we're trying to accomplish that, but we definitely have to have a little bit more meat behind that. So I appreciate you coming in and explaining that to us, letting us know, because it looks like we have a little work to do on the back end after today. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, this is a proposed bill. And so if the committee wanted to move forward, we would vote to draft, and our excellent LCO attorneys would do the hard work of making sure that it says precisely what we want it to say. One last question. I know NIL for student athletes is an increasing trend. My understanding is that the university has limitations on what affiliations your athletes can make with companies. There's guidelines around what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. I suspect that those guidelines match pretty closely whatever policies you've established for yourself in terms of what are acceptable sponsorships to pursue and to engage in as well. Is it true to say that that both the athletic department, the university at large, and any policies that you might have that might govern guidance for student athletes are all consistent and to the extent that those are written down, I'm sure they are, could you provide those to the committee?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very
Yes.
much. We appreciate that. Thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you very much for your testimony. Then.
Thank you.
Next on the list is actually Sean Bradbury. He's number 8. He's contacted the committee earlier. He's not able to deliver his testimony here today due to an illness. So we'll move to Jen Widnes from the Independent Colleges. Good morning.
Good morning. This is the first time I've testified in person in a number of years, so it's good to be here and see all your faces. I'm Jen Widnes, and I'm the president of the Connecticut Conference of Independent Colleges, and I just want to provide testimony on 3 bills before you today. The first is 922 regarding the prohibition of transcript holds. We appreciate the compromise language in this bill, which allows institutions to continue to place holds on transcripts, but requires that a transcript be shared for purposes of employment. And just because we have some new members on the committee, last year we testified that all of our schools do have a policy in place that student transcripts may be held for unpaid student fees, student conduct, as well as holds due to unreturned equipments or books. These policies really actually allow institutions to hold students accountable for obligations owed without immediately going to a collections agency. And we had a CFO testify last year and had a good exchange with committee members, just explaining that these policies actually allow institutions to work with students and prevent sort of long-term detrimental impact on their future by going to collections for unpaid fees. The debts owed that lead to transcript holds at our institutions are actually not typically small charges due to late library fees or unpaid parking tickets. Less than 15% of the holds were on debts for under $1,000. So 50% were for debts that total between $1,000 and $5,000, and over 35% are for debts greater than $5,000. So for the independent colleges, we can't come to the legislature and ask for forgiveness, ask for those, if we had to forgive those debts, we couldn't ask for you to give us that funding, as the public colleges have mechanisms to recover those lost funds. So again, we really appreciate the compromise bill and this language and working with the proponents of this bill to get to this point. So thank you. The second bill we wanted to comment on was just 923 regarding the consideration of criminal history during the admissions process. Bill has been here before you a couple of years in a row. And in our testimony, we just outlined a couple of things to consider to make the bill a little bit stronger. Some of our concerns are around the timeline, if it could push out the implementation date till next year, considering that some professional degrees require a background check to get into the profession, such, teaching, nursing. So maybe to allow for us to ask a question after admission prior to enrollment, and then also campus safety. If a student's going to live on campus in housing, to be able to ask that question again after admission, but before enrollment. And, looking at other states, just some schools have concerns about institutional autonomy as private colleges. Other states have, limited these bills to just public colleges. There's a handful, more than half the states that have done ban the box are just around public colleges. The last bill I just wanted to comment on is an auto admit bill 5742. To just let you know that we have 5 member institutions that are participating in this program and are pleased to be able to participate in it. And that the Office of Workforce Strategy is actually convening a working group right now with stakeholders from higher ed and K-12 to look at the process, look at the program and how we can improve it. So just be on the lookout. I know you'll say it's a little late in the process to be doing a working group right now, but the program just rolled out in the fall. So we just started being able to even talk about what could be better because it just begun. So thanks for your time and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for your testimony and your good attempt to be brief. We appreciate that. We have your written testimony. We appreciate that. It's gonna be, can you tell me, so on 922, I was looking for the words on the page. You support the bill as currently written?
Yeah, I think we're comfortable with the bill as currently written.
Support might be too strong a word, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we totally understand both, where the proponents are coming from and the concern. And we also have to see our members' institution side of things where, they're saying this is a more gentle way of trying to get students to continue to engage to pay off their bills than going to collections.
Great. And then for 923, you made mention of, the possibility of ensuring that independent colleges could ask the question after admission. I just want to complete the thought. Does that mean that not to be used to deny admission, but to for what are the reasons that you specified? You said like for safety for campus?
Right. So I mean, so the language that we had been working on with council last year is to say, so we struck the thing, there was a line in there that says you can't ask it for admission to certain programs. So we strike that to say, yeah, we'll admit you to the institution, but if you're going to enroll in a certain program that requires a background check to pursue that occupation or to be in a clinical placement, that will be able to ask those questions. So similarly for auto admit, for example, we're enrolling students generally into the institution, but we can't auto admit them into certain programs that require, a certain GPA, et cetera. And so similarly, we would take that approach. And, there is language or council will say upfront that says, notwithstanding federal and state law that may require it, but I think we just want to be clear that institutions have that capacity to ask those questions.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions by members of the committee? Representative Cooley.
Just following up on that line. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on that line of question. What would be the point of a student getting into, let's say, teaching program with felony conviction where they can't pass the background check, so they couldn't go into the profession?
Right.
So is that one
But
of
they
your-
could still enroll at the University of St. Joseph in other programs, and there could offer those opportunities to them, but say, given your history, you can't pursue teaching, right? And so we don't want you to spend your money in these coursework if you can't, obtain licensure after the fact.
Okay, just checking. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Mohit Agrawal. I don't know if I've seen Mohit.
I'm right here in Zoom, Representative.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's online. Thank you.
No
Sorry,
worries.
I saw that. I missed you online. Yeah.
No worries.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and why don't you proceed?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Chairs, ranking members, and members of this committee, I'm so excited to be here in front of you today, speaking in support of House Bill 5743, an act concerning the Connecticut Automatic Admissions Program. I'm a PhD student in economics, where I focus on the economics of education and healthcare, and I have a policy background in workforce development and post-secondary education. I haven't yet submitted my written testimony, but I hope to have that to you soon. So over the last decade or even longer, the legislature and this committee in particular have been very, very active in promoting improvements to post-secondary outcomes in the state of Connecticut. I'm really struck by CGS 10A-11C, which sets a really high bar for post-secondary outcomes for the state. And that really is kind of a clarion call for what we should be able to achieve here in Connecticut. This committee, in partnership with the governor over the last few years, has supported, a multitude of new programs around workforce and post-secondary, including, in particular, the establishment of the Office of Workforce Strategy, a smaller program that was supported by this committee in the 2021 budget implementer is what was called the Connecticut Automatic Admissions Program. So this program is at its core a no fee, no recommendation letter, no essay, simplified application process for students who meet a certain academic threshold to apply to college, and in particular to the 4 regional universities, Central, Western, Eastern, and Southern. And on top of that, as mentioned by the previous speaker, our private colleges in the state are allowed to participate. Roughly 13 states have programs, that kind of mirror this in place. So really every state is quite different. And 9 of those states, the most famous of these may be Texas, where such a program is used for admissions to their flagship. Perhaps 9 states have programs that are most similar in that they use programs like this to admit students into their non-flagship campuses, such as what Connecticut is doing here. And so every program differs really. There's really no one single approach, but I think the approach Connecticut takes makes sense, but can be improved upon. So let me just mention a couple of goals of what we are intending to do with this legislation. More broadly with the Connecticut Automatic Admissions Program. So at the macro level, there are some really important things that the Connecticut Automatic Admissions Programs really helps the state do. And first is that we can improve post-secondary enrollment by addressing one of the key barriers that affect students, which is the application process, whether that's the cost, getting the letters, writing the essay. There's economic research that shows quite compellingly that there are a number of students who are likely to succeed in college who don't recognize that in themselves and perhaps don't have the support and mentorship they need in high school to recognize that, and therefore don't proceed to college. And so by setting an academic threshold in statute and saying this is what it means to be able to succeed in college and you should be applying, really would help clarify that process.
That is your 2-minute mark. Please summarize.
Thank you. And would help bring these students into college. At a micro level, we're helping students save hundreds of thousands of dollars in admissions fees, tens of thousands of dollars in application time. So with this legislation, I think there are several changes that should be pursued, primarily putting in statute a threshold for which students can be admitted. And I'm going to be very happy to work with this committee if you move forward with drafting this legislation. And my written testimony will provide more details on some of my suggestions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon. I see Representative Haynes, who's online, has a follow-up question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moet, great to see you, and glad you're here pushing this down the road a little bit further every year. So appreciate your efforts. Can you make mention it quickly to the other micro
oh yes,
point that you were going to make in
Thank you.
regards to the particulars? Thank you.
That's right. So the macro level, we have these large macro policy goals here in the state. We want to improve post-secondary enrollment and success. We want to keep more kids in state. The best way to provide a high quality workforce for our employers is to keep the kids we have, because we do such a good job with them in K-12, in general. And we want to reverse the enrollment decline that our universities are facing. And we want to promote equity. In part, there are a number of students from diverse backgrounds who are, kind of in that category of students who might succeed but don't know it. So those are the macro goals. And the reason I'm kind of categorizing them in that way is because those are the goals that are aspirational. They're a little bit hard to quantify. We have some evidence. Idaho, perhaps, is the best state where a program that was a bit more expansive than what we have here it increased enrollment on their college campuses by 5 percentage points. So 5 percentage points more. In Connecticut, that would be another 2,000 high school seniors staying in state to go to college, right? And so those are real numbers. And I'm not sure this program as structured meets that, but I think that's a goal we can have in mind, that there are students out there who can succeed in college, who want to go to college, who are being blocked from doing so by various things. At the micro level, I think the most important thing to me is that this program simply saves money. It saves hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in application fees. And frankly, it also simplifies the process from the end for the colleges, because there's no need for holistic review for students who we know are likely to succeed in college and should be admitted. The other angle on the micro side is that this program runs in the fall, a little bit before the more usual application processes. And that's really important for a couple of reasons. One is kind of gets kids in the idea that, oh, I'm going to Central, I'm staying in Connecticut. But also it helps catalyze a conversation around, all right, you've been admitted. How do we make sure you actually show up? So let's set up, some financial aid counseling. Let's make sure you get that FAFSA submitted, right? Let's find you that housing. As you know, Representative, the state has, if the Roberta Willis and other programs, some financial aid available for students, but a lot of it is first come, first serve for those who are eligible. And so if we can get more of those kids in the door early and get them access to those funds, then I think it'll help improve outcomes even more. So those are some of the micro reasons I really wanted to mention today. But I think at the micro level, I think there are thousands of individual students in Connecticut who would benefit from this program and would benefit, and there are more who could benefit if we were to actually institute some explicit thresholds in statute. And then more broadly, I think this program does meet the goals of this committee, this legislature, and this governor in really improving the post-secondary outcomes in the state.
Great, thank you so much for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing him to finish that up.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, well, thank you very much for your testimony. I will say, Mohit, if you could drop me an email with your current contact information. I have a couple of follow-up questions, I guess, that I'll ask offline. But I suspect that having your current email address will be useful to me in the near future. So I do appreciate it.
Happy to. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Next on the list is Cindy Prizio. Don't see her online or in the room. So next would be John Board. John.
Let's try that again. Good afternoon, chairs Slappin Haddad, ranking members Kelly and Haynes, members of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. My name is John Board, a graduate of CSCU and former member of the Student Advisory Committee of the Board of Regents. I'm here to testify today in favor of 741, 738. Those are both the post-secondary outcomes bill for students with disabilities and my yearly student representation on the Board of Regents bill. I first want to give a shout out to Senators Winfield and Mertz for their recognizing the importance of ensuring funding for students with disabilities and sponsoring this important piece of legislation. In addition, I want to thank Representative Ortiz of Colorado, who's been a friend and continued partner in ensuring that we continue to bring issues of disability to the forefront of public policy discussions. Currently, Connecticut does not have a holistic database to examine post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities, and with the lack of information that prevents connecting students with disabilities to the workforce. Therefore, in order to meet economic demands, it's important that we collect this data, examine the post-secondary outcomes for services, supports, and any accommodations necessary to improve both their educational experience, career outcomes, and identify appropriation concerns and opportunities. The bill proposed creates a post-secondary advisory committee making recommendations on 5 major topics to the to the institutions of higher education, the General Assembly, and any additional bodies that the committee would deem necessary. Composition would be in regular form. Commissioners would serve until December 2025, at which point the commission would be disbanded. I've attached sample language for the committee just for their knowledge and reference. As it relates to the student representation bill, Representative Paris and I have Representative Paris knows that I've been extremely passionate about this issue since we were serving in Western's SGA together over a decade ago. Students deserve their representation to be restored on their governing board. Under Governor Rell, students had a 23% representation on the Board of Trustees. After Governor Malloy's reorganizations, students had their voice cut to 13%. While tuition continues to rise, unfunded mandates continue to be passed along to our universities and colleges. The concept of this bill is pretty simple: adding 2 more students to the Board of Regents.
Please summarize.
I have attached a historical one-pager to give you guys a little more background on this topic. Historically, you voted out this bill. Both the Board of Regents bill and the UConn bill, they both passed each other's chambers, but they've always died on the clock due to sine die, like most things in this building. Once again, I urge the committee to pass these bills, either standalone, incorporate them into an aircraft carrier, help bring parity for students at the end of the day. And I'm prepared to answer any questions which you guys may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. One of the things that was on sort of top of mind in the hall was, what do we mean by restored? There have always been 2 students on the board, but you're saying that maybe when they reorganized it, that we added many more members onto the Board of Regents. And so it diminished the voting power of the 2 students, right?
Absolutely. And I saw Mr. Bradbury's and the board and the CSCU office's testimony this morning. As a number, the system office may be correct, but as a proportion of voting power, I don't want to be too forward, but I'm correct.
Understood.
And to your point, Mr. Chairman, I think you were correct as well. I want to restore the percentage of the vote, and I know there's been different iterations over the years. To your surprise, I actually want to elevate another faculty member to the Board of Regents to make sure that it's, in my mind, keep the current composition of members, add the 2 more students, so we have 4 members, and then let's give faculty that additional seat, so then faculty have two representatives, one from the CSUs and one from the community colleges, from the FAC as well. I'm one who believes in equity, but also believes making sure that we have everyone around the table to make an informed decision. So that's kind of my position been over the years.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, one final comment: sine die is, the calendar can be cruel.
Yes,
we get it. We did pass the Board of Trustees bill for UConn one year. Actually, passed both the House and the Senate. 2015. It fell victim to governor's veto that year. But here we are again, still pushing.
Here we are again, and hopefully we'll give it another go.
Thank you for your advocacy. Is there any additional questions? Representative Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, John. It's good to see you today.
Good to see you, Representative.
So is it both the Board of Regents and the Board of Trustees? There's 2 student members on each of those, or is it different on the Board of Trustees?
So given my background, over the years, I've primarily have pushed the CCSU side of this things. The chair may correct me if I'm wrong, but from my recollection, it's still 2 and 2. He's nodding affirmatively. So yes, 2 student representatives, both on the Board of Trustees and the Board of Regents.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned the percentage for overall membership has diminished throughout the years. Do you know what the total number of board members on the Board of Regents are now?
If I remember properly, and I would have you refer to my one pager, but if I remember properly, I think it is 17 voting members, 4 ex officio being certain commissioners, and then the 2 student representatives. And I think over the years, the faculty have been able to gain 1 seat. I'm looking to the chairman for. I think I would just refer you to the Board of Regents website just to be sure, but if my memory serves me correctly, it's 17, 4, 2, and 1.
The 4 ex officio members are part of the 17?
No, they are they're non-voting advisory members.
Okay, so 17 total voting members, 2 are students.
Excluding those 2. Not to muddy the waters, I would just say check the Board of Regents site, and we can follow up offline
Okay.
with that to make sure I give you the correct information.
All right, I'll check that. And do you know, John, is there any specification on those 2 student members, criteria? Like, for example, 1 commuter, 1 resident student, anything like that?
The bylaws of the SAC, the Student Advisory Committee, outline that the chair and the vice chair, 1 needs to be from the from the community colleges, 1 needs to be from the universities. That is the only regulations put in place. Certain student governments have their own regulations in terms of GPA requirements, some enrollment requirements. I know Western over the years has branched out into senators and representatives and different styles. So it's up to the local colleges to potentially impose more regulations, but the minimum regulations from a system level, 1 member from the universities, 1 member from the colleges.
Okay, and the 2 additional members you're proposing, what would the specifications be on those?
How I've written them in my draft legislation is actually it would still be the chair and the vice chair of the SAC. 1 would come from you guys, being leadership of the Higher Education Committee, and 1 from the governor. Once again, that comes back to my common notion of making sure that everyone's voice is heard. Part of that is making sure that student representation is heard from all the major players here around the state, including the governor and the legislature. And I've always been an advocate of making sure that legislative appointments, that you guys get your fair shake on state boards and commissions.
Thanks, John. So that's your proposal. Do you know what's and I'll look in when we're done talking, what's in the actual bill in front of us today? Does it specify your recommendation?
No,
or is it not?
It's a concept bill.
It's still proposed. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much for that background information, John. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. We will move on. Next up is Brittany Lamar. She, I think, had scheduled to join us remotely, but I don't see her online. After that would be Cynthia Stretch. I don't see her in the room. Just check with the clerk. Brittany Lamar is not in the waiting room, right? Okay. So next up would be Greg Gonzalez. Welcome to Higher Education Committee. Look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Haddad, Chairman Slapp, and members of the committee. My name is Greg Gonzalez, and I'm Legislative Counsel for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, also known as FIRE. FIRE is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the free speech and due process rights of students and faculty at our nation's institutions of higher education. Throughout its over 20-year history, FIRE has defended students and faculty on all parts of the political spectrum. We have also advocated for campus free speech legislation in state houses across the country. I am here in support of HB 6567. This bill is a step in the right direction for freedom of expression at Connecticut institutions of higher education. First, the bill would designate public areas of campus as public forums. This would effectively ban so-called free speech zones. These are often small, remote areas that impermissibly quarantine expressive activity to isolated areas of campus. Over 20 states have already enacted laws to ban so-called free speech zones. Additionally, the bill attempts to eliminate unconstitutional security fees on students for invited speakers. These occur when public institutions charge a student organization a security fee for a speaking event based on the expected response such an event would attract. This is an impermissible heckler's veto on the event that the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional in a 1992 decision. While we are supportive of this bill, we believe there are some important changes that can improve this legislation. First, the current language says university policies can have, quote, reasonable limitations on time, place, and manner of expression, provided such limitations are content neutral and necessary to a compelling institutional interest, end quote. These limitations should also be viewpoint neutral, not just content neutral, to comport with existing case law. Further, I note that the level of scrutiny, the time, place, and manner restrictions on expression deviates slightly from the standard provided by the Supreme Court of the United States in Ward v. Rock against racism, which indicated that time, place, and manner regulations on speech are constitutional if they were, quote, narrowly tailored to serve a significant governmental interest. These restrictions must also leave open alternative channels for the communication of the information or message. Additionally, we recommend clarifying the definition of materially and substantially interfere, as well as clarify how universities may calculate security fees. We can provide the committee with helpful language to address this ambiguity. Additionally, FIRE is open to working with universities on these policies to ensure they protect expressive rights and pass constitutional muster. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. I don't see a written version of your testimony either online or in my paper book here. So I would ask that you make sure that you submit your written testimony to the clerk and we can make sure we get that. And I think additional suggestions for language would be welcome as well. If you wanted to forward that to the clerk, that would be helpful. We can make sure the leadership of the committee gets those.
Yes, we have a model bill of the model legislation if you can take a look at.
Are there any additional questions by members of the committee? Seeing none, I'll check online. I think we're all set. Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Find my list. Next up is Jillian Davey.
Hi, I'm going to, can I request that you move on to the next person? I'm currently walking to a location I can testify in.
I see that the next person is online and waiting, so I'll circle back to you in just a moment.
Great, thank you.
Next up is Santo Peruccio.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Haddad, Chairman Slapp, ranking members, vice chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide this important testimony. My name is Santo Peruccio, and I'm here today to urge you to pass HB 5737, an act concerning health insurance for retired part-time faculty of the CSU system. As a current and long-term part-time faculty member of CCSU, I can speak to the critical importance of this bill. I've been a committed faculty member at CCSU and have dedicated over 23 consecutive years and continuous semesters of state service, both on full-time appointments and as an adjunct lecturer in the School of Engineering Technology, both teaching courses and conducting labs. Despite my years of commitment and dedication, the injustice in pay and benefits is significant. A full-time member, 9 credits or more per semester, is vested in state retiree health insurance after 10 years or 180 credit hours. Yet, even after having accumulated myself over 280 credit hours of service at CCSU and 23 plus years of state service, upon retirement, I'll be left with no state health insurance. This is a clear and disturbing case of unequal treatment for equal work performed. I've known retired part-time faculty members who have accumulated more than 25 years of service and above the 180 credit hours and have no access to healthcare except for the Medicare at the age of 65, which only covers about 80% of most healthcare costs. After dedicating decades of our lives to educating students and serving the state, we deserve access to healthcare in our retirement. From a per course profit and loss perspective, part-time faculty members generate enough gross profit that should substantially cover any costs in retiree healthcare benefits. From CCCSU's 22-23 fee breakdown sheet on their online, the undergraduate credit fee is about $595 per credit hour. My average class size is about 22 students. If you multiply that $595 times 3 credit hours times 22, my classroom in one semester generates $39,270 in total revenue. My compensation for that semester is a quarter of that amount. So there's a $30,000 net contribution for each semester that I've been teaching, which is about a 75% gross margin. Despite the significant contribution, none of it has been reinvested for dedicated adjunct faculty member. This is a clear example of inequity and injustice. Providing retiree healthcare benefits has a positive effect on adjunct faculty, quality, attraction, and retention. We can attract a larger pool of highly qualified candidates with real-world experience, such as myself, who would otherwise not consider state service. In turn, this enhances part-time faculty retention and improves long-term institutional planning. And there will be an incentive to remain in state service for at least 10 years, same vesting period as full-time faculty. This further enhances our overall competitiveness and improves the quality of our higher education system, making our Connecticut State College more attractive to students and employees alike. I understand that the Connecticut State Legislature is considered part-time, yet after 10 years of service, its members become fully eligible for state-sponsored health insurance upon leaving state service for the rest of their lives. This is an example of inequity in action.
2-minute mark, please summarize.
Well, passing the HB 5737 is an opportunity to show commitment to equity, justice, and fairness. It's an opportunity to support retired part-time faculty who have dedicated their lives to serving the state and who deserve access to healthcare in their retirement. I urge you to support this bill and take a step towards ensuring equal treatment for all of Connecticut's educators. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate you took the time out of your day to share your perspective with us. I would like to thank you for 23 years of continuous service. We appreciate the work that you do for students over the decades now, and appreciate that you took the time to share with us your perspective on the inequity that you feel. I'm guessing Representative D'Amico might have a question for you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a matter of fact, I do. So, Professor Peruccio, thank you very much for submitting testimony and testifying in front of us today. So I presume, based on your comments, that for you and for your colleagues, this is an equity issue. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so I guess the argument is that you put in the time and you teach courses over several years, an equal number of courses to people who do end up with health insurance benefits, but you don't enjoy those same benefits, even though you teach and accumulate a certain number of credit hours.
That is correct. That is correct. It's a gross variance. It's a gross variance of that. So, and this is strictly, we're talking about healthcare benefits. We're not even taking into consideration paid holidays, vacations, inequity in pay. That's not even in the charts, but at least from a retiree healthcare perspective, I feel that's one of the most important things. Myself, approaching retirement, I'm currently 60, and it's something that I think about. I love teaching. I love my students. I do it for my passion. I want to impart my knowledge. I have decades of experience in IT, and I do it for the students and for our community and for our kids. And I think we deserve better as as adjunct faculty. At a minimum, this would be a great start for us.
So thank you for that. And I just, you are more knowledgeable about this than I am, of course. Is the trend in the university system to hire more people like yourself working part-time as adjunct professors and less full-time professors? Is that what's going on, or is that a misperception?
No, that is 100% correct. I'm sure there's people that have accurate data. I don't have that in my possession right now, but I believe when I was hired 23 years ago, 1999, I believe, if I recall, there was 30% probably, and this is just a good guesstimation of part-timers versus full-time. And I think it's actually reversed now in 2023.
And
so we are the teaching majority for sure.
I appreciate that. And with the good chair's forbearance, I'll ask just one other question, if I could. So Professor Peruccio, I've introduced this legislation for a couple of years in a row now at the behest of a couple of your colleagues that are also adjunct professors, and the pushback for the last couple of years, I guess, could probably be categorized in two different ways. That this is going to cost the state of Connecticut too much money, and that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to calculate the number of people and the individuals to whom these benefits should accrue. So I'm just wondering if you feel comfortable speaking to either of those two issues, the financial part and the calculation part, if you would.
Sure. So two things. First of all, we are definitely underpaid. You saw in my oral and written testimony that we generate very positive revenue, gross margin for the university. There should be funds to, at a minimum, cover the retiree healthcare cost. I think that would be a minimum. I don't know the numbers. I don't feel there is I guess we could, there are ways through the system office to verify how many adjuncts have been teaching for 10 years investing, I would say, and the 180 plus credits. It's not difficult to do. When I requested a long time ago what my credit hours were, it took HR, today in a matter of seconds to understand. I think it'd be very easy to find out which adjunct faculty members would be eligible for that, and maybe forecast what would be coming up in the future for fiscal planning purposes. I don't think that's hard information to obtain.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions by members of the committee? Representative Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for your testimony. As both a former tenure track faculty member and an adjunct faculty member, I've seen both sides of this. And I also know, and I would love to know from you, Professor, are you seeing what I thought I started seeing when I was teaching adjunct here in the state, that there were more and more faculty members being given course loads that were commensurate with full-time faculty, for example, 3 classes per semester. Is that a trend you're seeing now among yourself and your colleagues?
It's not by contract. We're not allowed to teach more than 8, and now changed to 8.5 credit hours in one institution. I believe, and I've taught also as a full-time member, approximately 2 years on special appointments. I believe that you cannot teach at one institution, but you could teach at multiple institutions, and maybe someone else would have better knowledge on that. There is a push. I've been in charge of labs. I've been in charge of programs for students for software distribution and other aspects that pertain to my field. And I've always, and I feel this is what most adjunct faculty members do, is they go above and beyond for their students, as full-time faculty do as well. Again, this is an equity concern where we are really grossly underpaid, underbenefited, and it needs to be adjusted. I think now it's beyond delay. I always thought when I started my young career, in my 30s, that we had benefits. It's great, working for the state. And then again, obviously my passion was for the students and the kids. And I've seen more that I've grown fond of our campus. I am an alumni of CCSU. I'm a Yale alumni as well in state. I've invested all my time and effort and knowledge to give back to my community. And I feel that my community is not giving back to me. And that's my stance on that.
If I might ask a follow-up, Chair, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for that. I asked because I know that I had colleagues that were, as you said, going from one campus to teach, say, 2 classes and then another to teach another 2, functionally being a full-time professor, just in different places. So that will be interesting to have data moving forward on that, as you said, because as I know from my own experience, you teach just as diligently and are just as dedicated as an adjunct as you would be as a full-time. So I appreciate your insight on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see more hands being raised. And so first we'll go to Representative Turco, and then his questions will be followed by Representative Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Professor, for your testimony. I am very supportive of this issue as well, having had constituents that have been adjuncts for a long time and were not able to receive healthcare. And I think you're correct that adjuncts are being used throughout the state to fill positions that full-time faculty would have filled in the past and are grossly underpaid. Being an adjunct myself, I know that for sure. One of the things I wanted to make sure you kept in mind as you advocate for this issue going forward, and maybe talk with your HR department to figure out a little bit more of this too, because I remember meeting with the comptroller's office. It might have been 2 years ago now when we had this bill in front of us and discussing the issue. And they had said to us that there is now an annual payment of sorts that full-time faculty members are putting into the healthcare plan for their retirement. That as some, part of your paycheck is being used towards going to being able to be vested for your healthcare when you retire. And adjunct professors do not pay that part of their paycheck into this fund. So if an adjunct professor, after earning enough credits and then retires, were to be eligible for the healthcare benefit, as this bill is proposing, there would need to be some mechanism, again, for equity and fairness of what the full-time faculty members pay. There have to be, and it could be a substantial amount of a payment to the state of Connecticut for the employee portion of the earned benefit of retiree healthcare. So I don't know how we, and the comptroller's office at the time wasn't able to figure out exactly how much that amount would be and how that amount would be collected. But I just want to make sure you're armed with that information as you continue to advocate that this issue would need to be solved if this bill were to be passed. And I don't know if you already have any thoughts about that. Thank you.
Yeah, my thought on that is, we could take the other end of that argument and say we've been grossly underpaid. I've been grossly underpaid for 23 years versus a full-time faculty member performing the same work. How do you quantify that? Does the state owe me 23 years worth of underpayment? That's my thought on that.
No, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you Professor for your service. I actually started as an adjunct years and years ago. Just coming at the issue, I think one of the problems here is budgetary, and the opposition to this is budgetary. Would you be willing to increase the credit hours taught to make it more budget friendly so that maybe we can get this through? Kind of a recalculation to make the numbers work better for our for the state, and to still be able to provide benefit to the long-serving adjuncts in the state, as opposed to 180 credits, maybe increase it to 240, which would be a pretty long adjunct career, but it might make it more economically palatable budget-wise to get this through. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that that's a talking point. I wouldn't see anything. I think it's a valid talking point. Most professors will teach between 9 and 12 credits, and I think that's a valid talking point. Yes.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see any additional questions. I will say that the ratio of adjunct professors to non-adjunct professors in the Higher Education Committee is pretty favorable. So we'll see how this goes. Thank you very much for your testimony. Next up is we'll circle back to Jillian Davey. She'll be followed by Grace Friedman. Grace will be followed by William Roberts. Jillian.
Good afternoon, Senator Slapp, Representative Maher, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Jillian Davey, and I am an MSW student at the UConn School of Social Work and an intern community organizer at the Cattell Center for Equity, Health, and Justice. I am testifying in strong support of SB 923, an act prohibiting the consideration of criminal history during the admissions process at an institution of higher education. Attending college and graduate school has had a tremendous influence on the person I am today, allowing me to better myself and in turn, better my community. My experience in higher education has put me on a career trajectory that will allow me to economically and financially support myself and find fulfillment in the work that I do. I believe that every person in Connecticut should also have the opportunity to pursue post-secondary education. Education is directly correlated with the economic stability. 70% of jobs in Connecticut require post-secondary degrees. Formerly incarcerated people have lower levels of education and are 8 times less likely to complete college than the general public. As such, it is nearly impossible for formerly incarcerated job seekers to compete in an economy that increasingly demands highly skilled and credentialed workers. Educational institutions asking applicants about convictions is itself a barrier to education and a barrier to economic stability. Studies have found that 2/3 of college applicants with records who were asked to disclose the records never completed their applications. This systemic exclusion of people with criminal histories in higher education institutions is discriminatory and counterproductive to promoting community safety, as education is correlated to a 43% reduction in recidivism rates. Incarceration disproportionately impacts Black and Latinx communities. To make Connecticut more equitable and promote inclusive economic opportunity for all, we need to start by ending practices that discriminate against justice-involved people. I strongly support SB 923 and urge you to favorably vote the bill out of committee with as broad and inclusive language as possible with no carve-outs for any offenses. I would also like to take this time to express my support for HB 6355, an act increasing the number of student members on the UConn Board of Trustees, with a proposed amendment to include 2 undergraduate student members on the Board of Trustees, 1 from the main residential campus in Storrs and 1 from a regional campus, in addition to the graduate student member. As we've seen, especially with the recent conversations around budget and student tuition increases, the Board of Trustees determines the allocation of state and federal dollars and the resources within the school and has an enormous influence on student life and well-being. Unfortunately, the regional campuses are often left behind in these conversations and are underfunded and under-resourced. Adding 2 student members to the Board of Trustees is a step in the right direction. But as we've heard, we must recognize the experience of undergrad students at the regional campuses are different from those of students at Storrs. The regional campuses are home to many students of color, low income, and non-traditional students. It is important that UConn includes the voices
Please summarize.
includes the voices and needs of these students in the governance of their school. Therefore, I am asking you to amend HB 6355 to include 3 student members on the UConn Board of Trustees, 1 graduate student, 1 residential undergraduate student, and 1 regional campus undergraduate student. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be briefly taking over from my co-chair for a moment here. Any questions? And I'm going to be looking online here. Okay. I do not see any. So thank you so much for your time and for your testimony.
Okay, and I will be submitting my written testimony. I just haven't had a chance yet. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is, we're going to go to Grace Friedman, who is joining us remotely, I believe. Grace, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today.
Absolutely.
Senators, representatives, ranking members, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Grace Friedman, and I'm a member of the Justice Impact Movement that advocates for the removal of barriers to higher education for justice-impacted individuals. I'm here to proudly communicate my strong support for SB 923. This bill would prevent institutions of higher education from inquiring about a prospective student's prior arrests, criminal charges, or convictions, and prohibit its consideration in the process of admissions and determination of such students' financial aid, grants, or scholarship programs. Upon matriculating to Yale University, I met Dieter Tejada. He exposed me to the difficulties justice-impacted individuals faced, specifically when applying to institutions of higher education. The box, which asks an individual to disclose their criminal history, determines a potential applicant's entire fate based solely upon their prior involvement in the justice system. Troubled by this inquiry, I spent countless hours researching and compiling information to form my argument and fuel the justice impact movement. The facts are overwhelming. Inquiring about a criminal justice information is not only unnecessary, it disproportionately impacts students of color under the guise of increasing campus safety, with no research basis to substantiate that claim. Systemic racism is present at every stage in the criminal justice system, from school disciplinary policies to juvenile arrests, to the lengths of incarceration, to the imposition of the death penalty. So pervasive is the racial inequality in the criminal justice system, it is impossible for the inquiry and usage of criminal justice information in college admissions to be a race-neutral practice. In the 21st century, a criminal record serves as the basis for de facto denial of civil rights. Education is a necessity in today's economy. Given the power of education to reduce recidivism, protecting justice-impacted individuals would break the cycle of incarceration and instead usher in a life of employment and restoration, creating a positive economic benefit that will ripple through entire communities for generations. This bill would directly address the structural exclusion to higher education for justice-impacted individuals and the economic benefits it would generate. Connecticut should lead in this national fight for educational equity and favorably vote Senate Bill 923 out of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. Thank you.
Grace, thank you very much for your testimony. I do have one question for you. We heard earlier from our independent colleges here that they were, I think, generally supportive of the bill, but wanted to ensure that there was language that allowed for the schools and colleges to ask once there was admittance, but to ask before entry into a certain program if the career that program would lead to had some prohibition against certain kind of criminal histories. And then they also were interested in being able to ask about criminal background when it comes to housing. What do you think about those two suggestions from our independent colleges?
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think that in general, this bill really applies to before the application screening process. Right now, as the box stands, it is excessively punitive and shows no overall benefit to ask for the colleges. The bill, to my knowledge, does not discuss once an applicant is admitted, the inquisition about their criminal history, but this is specifically about discrimination in terms of getting into a higher education program.
Understood. Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to hand it back to my co-chairman, Representative Haddad, to see if there's any questions remote or if there's any other members who have questions.
Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? Seeing none in the room or online, well, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate that. We'll move on to William Roberts. William Roberts will be followed. We're going to jump back to somebody who we skipped over earlier, Cindy Prizio. After she testifies, we'll move to Elaine Lesham. Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon, Senator Slapp, Representative Haddad, ranking members Kellyanne Haynes, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is William Roberts, and I'm leader with the ACLU of Connecticut Smart Justice Campaign. I am testing in support of Senate Bill 923, an act prohibiting the consideration of criminal history during the admissions process at an institution of higher education or private school or by an educational or apprenticeship programs. I believe in a society where all people, including those who have been convicted or accused of a crime, should have an equal opportunity to build successful and fulfilling lives. All people deserve to live their lives without barriers to being happy and productive residents. But rather than support people with criminal records to thrive in their communities, Connecticut law barricades them from educational opportunities, employment, and essential social services. Nationwide, 60 to 80% of private higher education institutions and 55% of public higher education institutions require undergraduate applicants to answer criminal history questions. This includes 40% of community colleges. Less than 2 in 5 colleges that require disclosure of criminal records instruct their admissions staff on how to interpret the information they receive from students. In Connecticut, some public universities ask about prospective students' criminal legal system involvement. Simply asking about convictions is a barrier. In one study, 2/3 of applicants with records who were asked to disclose their records never completed their applications. When I chose to go to college, I felt that Manchester Community College was the best place for me. Upon registration, I was immediately hit with my first barrier. I had no transcripts even though I had graduated high school. DCF had not given me my diploma or transcripts when I left my residential placement. After finally securing a copy of my diploma and completing the registration, I was accepted, and I even made it on the dean's list several semesters. It was there that I ran into my second barrier. I was called down to the dean's office in the middle of class one day where I was accused of not telling the administration I was a formerly incarcerated person and currently on probation. The administration then locked me out of my online records immediately. I could no longer see my grades online, register for classes online, and before each semester, I had to have my probation officer contact the school to say that I was still in compliance with the law. Only then could I register classes with someone inside the office and pick my classes. By the time this usually happened, the new semester was only days away, sometimes the next day, and the secretary had to use her own name as a placeholder while waiting for the administration to get around to fully registering me for the semester. It's because of this I couldn't take classes I need, as most classes were always filled by the time I could register due to not having access to register online. Before I could finish my last semester with only 5 classes left to get my degree, I was arrested by Hartford police. After spending a week in county before posting bond with the remaining $5,000 I owned in savings, I spent a month going back and forth to court. I could not finish my semester due to the pending court case. Although my case was dismissed by the judge due to Hartford police having no probable cause to have arrested me, I immediately became homeless. There was also no legal recourse on recovering the $5,000 I lost posting bond because it went to a bondsman. I never went back to get my degree. I was tired of how they treated me and how society kept treating me. This is why I'm here today, why I continue to come here year after year to continue to break and destroy these barriers set before us. So I strongly urge passage of Senate Bill 923 to create a more just and equitable Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Thanks very much for your testimony. I will ask if there's any questions. I don't see any, so you're okay. Like you can, yeah, you come back. Next up is Cindy Prizio. She'll be followed by Elaine Lesham if she arrives in the room.
Good afternoon, Senator Slapp, Representative Haddad, Senator Kelly, Representative Haynes, and all members of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. My name is Cindy Prizio, Executive Director of One Standard of Justice, and I testify in strong support of SB 923, or I guess it's known as Ban the Box, for education admissions. OSJ assists individuals who struggle to rebuild their lives after facing conviction for a sexual offense. We've submitted testimony, so I'm just going to go off the cuff. The same thing with employment. I don't know if this bill goes far enough, quite frankly. When a person is convicted of an offense and they serve their sentence, I believe they're entitled to come out, and in order to better themselves, which is of course what we should all want, they should have admissions to any university in the state without any risk or threat of denial. And further, we know that education inside a prison and outside reduces recidivism. And what it does is it prepares people for a better life, a better career, where they become productive citizens for their community. Instead, at every angle, we throw barriers in front of them. So I say not only ban the box for the entire admissions process, but also for employment. We are losing so many beneficial people. Who do we know who's the next person to come up with, some gadget that makes the world a better place? In this building, there's a tangible vibe that it's us against them, or good versus evil. And I know amongst the group I serve, people on the sex offense registry, that we judge them as otherworldly people, that they're monsters. We dehumanize them by thinking they have horns, a tail, and claws, when they are people just like you and me. They could be you and me. And so I'm asking to eliminate all carve-outs and look at this group as a whole. You want to make a better Connecticut? This is the way we do it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll ask if there are any questions from members of the committee. Seeing none online or in the room, thank you very much for your testimony. We'll move
Thank you.
on to Elaine Lesham. Ms. Lesham will be followed by Natalia Torres, who I think is online and joining us remotely.
Good afternoon, Chairman, ranking members, and other esteemed members of this committee. I am here to testify in support of SB 923. I'm a graduate student at the UConn School of Social Work. My community organizing focus has been on creating equitable student outcomes for marginalized populations in higher education. In this capacity, I've analyzed not only the personal and societal benefits of higher education, but also the extensive structural barriers that impede access to these resources. SB 923 serves to remove one such barrier that has excluded justice-impacted individuals. Criminal history inquiries deter potential students from applying and also allows for rejections based on bias. SB 923 also advances racial justice as we recognize the racial inequities of our justice system. This includes the system's reliance on plea bargains to resolve most all cases. By agreeing to plead guilty to charges, even in cases of innocence, defendants are burdened with a lifetime of discrimination due to barriers in every aspect of their lives, including employment, housing, and education. Removing inquiries about these records on post-secondary applications eliminates the opportunity for negative stigma to affect access to education. We also know that access alone does not provide educational equity. Vulnerable student populations need an environment of higher education that values and supports their unique needs and diversity. I believe that Connecticut has made great investments in such equity-minded programs, such as the Guided Pathways model at our community colleges. I've worked with similar evidence-based practices at both the University of Connecticut and the University of Hartford that can work in tandem with SB 923 to support these students to persist through degree completion. Overall, this bill is invaluable in recognizing and removing hurdles that unfairly exclude justice-impacted individuals from the resources most critical to their future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there questions from members of the committee? Representative D'Amico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lesham, thank you for coming in to testify. Thank you for your thoughtful words. I guess I'll ask the obvious question. Would you not agree that educational institutions have a legitimate safety concern when they require the acknowledgement of a prior criminal history?
So for my preparation for this bill, we do extensive research at, through the School of Social Work. And there actually, while there are not a lot of studies, there is no study that shows a causation between increased crime on campus and applicants or students there that have a history with a criminal record.
I don't know what to say to that, but that's interesting to note. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony and your expertise. We appreciate that. Next up is Natalia Torres. After Natalia finishes delivering her testimony, I see Brittany Lamar, who was previously passed over. We'll go to her. Natalia.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Senator Slapp, representatives, ranking members, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Natalia Torres Arsuaga. I'm an undergraduate student at Yale University. I'm here to communicate my strong support for SB 923. This bill would ban the box at institutions of higher education in the state, preventing them from inquiring about a prospective student's prior arrest, criminal charges, or convictions, and prohibit its consideration in the process of admissions and determination of such students' financial aid, grants, or scholarship programs. As of today, 14 states have adopted legislation banning the box in employment, while California, Louisiana, Maryland, Colorado, and Washington have banned the box for higher education. Over 50 universities, including the University of California system and the State of University of New York system, have banned the box. A 2016 study found no statistical difference in campus crime rates between institutions that collected students' disciplinary backgrounds and those that did not. In fact, the Clery Act reports that the crimes committed on college campuses are more likely to involve students with no criminal record. As it stands, inquiring about criminal justice information disproportionately impacts students of color, and it has no significant positive efficacy. Research has not substantiated the claim that inquiring about criminal justice information increases campus safety. Systemic racism is pervasive in the American education system, ranging from the school to prison pipeline to the attainment of college degrees. So pervasive is the criminal justice system in the lives of Black men that more Black men have done prison time than have earned college degrees. Because racial bias occurs at every stage of the criminal justice system, screening for criminal records cannot be a race-neutral practice. Education is a necessity in today's economy. Workers with post-secondary education earn 74% more than workers with a high school diploma or less. The proposed legislation aims to tackle these systemic barriers that prevent justice-impacted individuals from accessing higher education and the resulting economic advantages that it could bring. Connecticut should lead in this national fight for educational equity and favorably vote SB 923 out of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions by members of the committee here or online? I don't see any hands raised. Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate you taking the time. Next up is Brittany Lamar. She'll be followed by John O'Connor.
Thank you, Senator Slapp, Representative Haddad, ranking members Kelly and Haynes, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Brittany Lamar, and I'm a Smart Justice Leader with the ACLU of Connecticut, the Assistant Director of the National Prison Debate League, and the Chair of the Program and Delivery Models Work Group for the New England Commission on the Future of Higher Education Behind Bars. I am a mother, homeowner, dual degree MPP and JD candidate at UConn Law, and I am also formerly incarcerated. I am writing to testify in support of Senate Bill 923. Education provided me the only opportunity for a new path during my incarceration. I had the opportunity to take higher education and prison courses while incarcerated through the Quinnipiac Trinity Prison College program. It was through my classes and mentorship from my professors that I felt hope and saw an opportunity for myself, knowing I faced a very uphill battle when I got home as someone with a criminal conviction. Throughout my incarceration, I had written letters connecting with and engaging in dialogue with professors at UConn. It was ultimately those correspondence relationships that provided me with a solid enough letter of recommendation for my application to UConn to counter the criminal history I had to disclose. I would have been very hesitant to apply if I did not have anyone in my corner and only my criminal history as supporting documentation. It is not often that others are supported by the same resources that I had upon my return. 4 years later, I am working on my third degree from UConn, this time at UConn Law. Everyone deserves this opportunity to pursue higher education and a career pathway. There will be full restoration of Pell in the near future, and while I have worked in partnership with all 6 New England states and their Department of Corrections to identify program and delivery models for higher education in prison, we will have many more universities and colleges looking to provide these programs due to the funding they will be able to receive. As we expand access to higher education in prison, it only makes sense that those same opportunities exist when a person leaves prison. While we have much more work to do in eliminating the barriers to successful reentry, we can take a very easy step towards removing one of them when we pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions by members of the committee? I will just mention that I serve on the board of directors of the New England Board of Higher Education. They're sponsoring the project that you're involved in with the New England Commission on the Future of Higher Education in prison. So thank you for your work, both as a member of the board of the New England Board of Higher Education and also here at the General Assembly. We appreciate your work. I see Representative Haynes has a question. Representative Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brittany, I just wanted to say congratulations to you and your success, and also to keep up the good work in regards to the advocacy that you're doing for this particular group. I am a firm supporter of the idea. There's no reason why somebody who is looking for an education shouldn't be able to get that. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming today. Thank you for spending your time. And I would have also said that to the gentleman that came to preceding you too, but he was quick to leave the desk. So I'm glad you're still sitting there and I can say thank you. So I look forward to having this bill get out of our committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from members of the committee? Representative Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add as well, your story is very inspirational. Congratulations on all of the hard work. And so glad that you're a role model to so many and that you're here advocating on behalf of this issue. So thank you so much for sharing your story with the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any additional hands up, so I'll ask if John O'Connor is here. I don't see him online. If he's not available, then I'll ask if Amy Dowell, she is here, she's in the room, she'll go next. She'll be followed by Sandy Sawan.
Thank you to the chairs and ranking members for the opportunity to testify today and for raising this bill. My name is Amy Dowell. I am the State Director for Education Reform Now, CT, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 922, an act prohibiting an institution of higher education from withholding transcripts. Last year, Secretary Cardona said more must be done to recover from the damage caused by COVID-19. To emerge from the pandemic even stronger, institutional leaders must embrace long-term change, and that means evaluating long-standing institutional policies that block retention and completion for our most underserved students, such as enrollment and transcript holds for students with unpaid balances. And in 2022, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau began looking into the practice of transcript holds as a means of debt collection by colleges. These examinations found that withholding transcripts is an abusive practice under the Consumer Financial Protection Act. Most colleges will hold back transcripts for debts of less than $25, according to a 2020 survey of the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. The national average debt at community colleges is $631, and at a four-year college, it's $2,335. Here in Connecticut, nearly every single college and university utilizes the practice of withholding official transcripts for students and graduates that have remaining debts. The use of transcript traps stands in the way of too many students that struggle with college affordability from applying for gainful employment, perpetuating an unjust cycle of poverty. We know sometimes debts can accumulate for non-academic reasons, like parking tickets or library fines, or for unfortunate circumstances like mental and physical health issues. Colleges try to work with students using reminders, payment plans, or at last resort garnishing of tax returns and sometimes even collection programs. This bill would not absolve debts or hinder their collection. Colleges prefer to use transcript tracks because enforcement is essentially cost-free. And that's why they are really the only ones defending their importance. So while the merits of appropriate debt collection solutions are for another policy debate, withholding transcripts is a practice several states are moving away from for reasons of fairness and logic. California banned the practice of withholding transcripts for student debt in 2019, and in 2020, Washington State made it a requirement for colleges to release transcripts for job applications, regardless of debt status. The SUNY system has also ended the practice. Connecticut can be one of the first to move this work ahead on behalf of our college students. This policy is good for the future of our scholars, our workforce, and our state. Thank you for your time today, and I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions by members of the committee? I see none. So thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yes, of course. Nice to see you all in person.
Next up is Sandy Sawan. You're joining us remotely.
Thank you, Chairman, Senators, Representatives, Ranking Members, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Sandy Sawan. I reside in Newington. I am a mother, employed full-time, and currently working towards a dual degree, Master's in Social Work at UConn, and a JD candidate at Western New England. Today, I provide testimony in strong support of Senate Bill number 923. My concentration in policy practice has given me the capacity to see the policies that have impact on justice-involved individuals. Roughly 407,000 individuals living in Connecticut have criminal convictions. Applying for college can be intimidating enough. Policies that prohibit acceptance of any candidate with a criminal record actually impede a person's ability to get higher education. Without higher education, jobs are not currently in a market that can allow a person to prosper. Connecticut is one in 7 states that maintain a black to white disparity larger than 9-to-1 in conviction rates. The Center of Community Alternatives studied that effect and criminal history screenings on application completion. And a national audit found evidence of discrimination in admissions process based on criminal history. I've included in my written testimony and encourage you to watch the 10-minute presentation. Aside from the criminal justice system, it is a critical time to look at all of the policies and practices in higher education that contribute to structural and systemic racism. Considering the roles that criminal justice system and higher education are intended to play in society, it is time to stop re-adjudication of a crime during the admissions process and ban the box from the admissions process altogether. When the Pell Grant becomes accessible to those who are incarcerated effective on July 1st, 2023, it would be counterintuitive to keep an additional barrier or postpone this for another year, as it has already been historically postponed. The U.S. Department of Education sets up resource guides, a self-assessment for higher education institutes to examine whether and how to use criminal justice information in the higher education admissions process, such as if it's a necessity at all. And as for public safety, again, only few studies have examined whether screening college applicants for criminal history reduces crime on campus. And so, on the other hand, there is rigorous research that supports that increasing access to education reduces subsequent criminal behavior. When considering the 50th year of mass incarceration, tough on crime policies such as the school to prison pipeline that has subjected many punitive practices in schools and neighborhoods that funnel them out of school and into the juvenile or criminal justice system involvement, it's time we reverse these inequities in education and create a prison to school pipeline. Moreover, the school to prison pipeline has subjected many punitive practices in schools and neighborhoods that funnel them into the criminal justice system. It's time that we reverse these inequities in education and create a prison to school pipeline. Therefore, it is only in maintaining equity in higher education.
Summarize.
If you have a couple more words, feel free to complete.
Okay. So I just wanted to end off saying that that we want to go ahead and make this effective as the bill has stated on July 1st, 2023, to ensure that the ongoing commitment to building a more just and equitable society. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of this bill.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I was reading along your written testimony, which my staff printed out for me, and it seems like it grew in length from the time that you submitted it to the time that you delivered it. So if you have an updated version of your testimony that you want to provide to the committee, please do so. I wanted to ask you just a follow-up question. Earlier today, we heard from colleges and universities that they thought there is about the need, their perceived need to ask the question about criminal history after a student has been admitted. I think the intention there is so that they can help guide students into programs of study and occupations where their criminal history won't continue to be a barrier for them, or for a licensure, or, other requirements. Do you have a thought about that kind of accommodation that's been requested? Is there
So I believe in
middle ground here that makes sense for us to think about and contemplate?
Yeah, definitely. In the written testimony, I provided the assessment link that colleges or higher institutions should definitely look at and sort of use that as a guideline to that admissions process, where they can analyze what questions need to be asked. But it's definitely not getting into college where they should be asking about criminal records. As you said, it should be somewhat of a guidance to help them establish where to go from there, what barriers they need. And it's not impossible to get into certain placements in field or clinical placements with a criminal record, with the support that's needed to overcome that barrier.
Thank you for your response. Are there any additional questions by members of the committee here or online? I see none. So thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. We'll move on to Stephen Monroe Tomzak. He's joining us remotely. He'll be followed by Dieter Tejada.
Yes. Good afternoon, Senator Slop, Representative Haddad, and members of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. My name is Stephen Monroe Tomzak, a resident of Wallingford and a faculty member at Southern Connecticut State University in the Department of Social Work, where I've served for many years as a leader in our faculty union, CSU AUP. I'm testifying before your committee in support of HB 5737, an act concerning health insurance for retired part-time faculty of the Connecticut State University system. Although I am now a tenured full professor, I began my career as a part-time faculty member, working on a contingent per course basis for 6 years before being hired full-time. Having had the experience of working for minimal wages with no benefits, I am particularly concerned with the issues faced by my part-time colleagues. Few of these issues are more critical than the lack of health insurance, particularly for contingent part-time faculty who are retired and may face age-related health problems. This proposed bill seeks to create retirement health care equity for Connecticut's long-term part-time faculty who have many dedicated years of state service, as you have already heard. Currently, healthcare benefits are given to employed faculty teaching 9 or more credit hours per semester. After 10 years of teaching at 9 or more credits per semester, employed faculty become eligible for lifetime health insurance upon leaving state service. That's 180 credit hours with full benefits while teaching and the right to full health care at retirement. Part-time faculty teaching less than 9 credits per semester get nothing, no matter how many years they teach or how many credit hours they amass. I should add that they are often kept, as you've heard, below these amounts due to part-time credit restrictions at universities. Part-time contingent faculty members who teach 180 or more credit hours may take many years to do so, often teaching only 3 credit hours per semester for a period of 30 more years. There are dedicated part-time faculty who have taught in the CSU system for 25 years or more, with well over 180 credit hours by the time they retire. They leave with no health insurance, despite often putting in more time and credit hours than their full-time counterparts. They deserve equity, equal treatment for work performed. The older we are, the more likely we'll need healthcare, as I've already indicated. Retired part-timers with equal or more credit hours than those of us who are lucky enough to have full-time status don't have access to this healthcare that is equal to what we full-timers receive. Justice demands that our part-time colleagues receive equity in healthcare coverage, nothing more, nothing less. And so I therefore strongly urge you to vote for HB 5737, which would help address this injustice. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I've heard you deliver testimony a number of times in different committees over the years. You're perfectly timed out at 3 minutes, so good job. Are there any questions by members of the committee for Mr. Representative D'Amico?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Professor Tomczak, for coming to testify. We heard testimony earlier from one of your part-time colleagues in the system. And I guess in fairness, I should ask you maybe some of the same questions that were asked of him. So first of all, do you think that you and your colleagues would be likely to be willing to pay money into the system as the full-timers do in order to get these benefits?
Well, would our part-time faculty colleagues be willing to pay? I would imagine, I can't speak for them, of course, but I would imagine that they would. I should certainly say that as an individual who's a full-time faculty member, I would personally be willing to pay an additional surcharge on my own salary so that our part-time faculty could get healthcare benefits. But I can't necessarily speak for our part-time colleagues or, in fact, my other full-time colleagues. But I think that that's something that can be explored.
I'm sorry. My apologies. I had you in the wrong category, full-time versus part-time. My apologies for that.
I was formerly a part-time faculty, but now I'm full-time.
Okay, very good. So I guess the only other question I would ask you is the objection. I've introduced this bill a couple times in the last couple of years, and the objection to it, a couple of objections have centered around whether this would be too expensive for the state and whether it would be feasible to be able to calculate how many people to whom this applies. So it would be a logistical problem. So I'm just wondering, with your years of experience, if you would like to address either of those issues.
Well, I think my colleague spoke earlier to the fact that our HR departments keep fairly accurate records on this, and it would be reasonably easy to calculate who is eligible for this. As far as the other question, I don't necessarily have an answer to that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat your first question?
Oh, so the first question was the objection. One of the objections was that this would be far too costly for the state to be able to afford. Okay. And I'm sure that of course involves the number of people to whom it applies. So I just wanted to offer that as a question and see if you wanted to comment on that.
Well, I think I testified actually last night before the Appropriations Committee. I submitted testimony. I said I wasn't physically able to be there, but we are certainly requesting a greater level of investment. The system office is requesting a greater level of investment in our universities, and in my opinion, the state has significant funds, surpluses, the rainy day fund, et cetera. And it would seem to me that it would be feasible to find money to finance this if there were a will to do so. And I would certainly urge that the legislature consider that.
Thank you very much, Professor. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Next up is Dieter Tejada. He's here in the room. He'll be followed by Manuel Sandoval. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Senator Slapp, Representative Haddad, ranking members Kelly and Haynes, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Dieter Tejada, and I'm the director of Just Impact Alliance, president of National Just Impact Bar Association, and a board member of WAMI, Women Against Mass Incarceration. I'm a lifelong resident of Connecticut, a homeowner with college and law school graduate. I'm gonna just deviate from this because I know we only have 3 minutes, and you've heard basically everything, the main points. I put in the written testimony something. If you want any information on this, I've been working on this for years. For years, I was wrongfully convicted as a kid. I went to college and law school after that. It's very clear from when I was 5 years old, education is important. We all know it. Right now, there's a massive barrier there. And it's something that this is a win for everyone. The colleges, they say they have an issue with racial diversity, trying to make it get more Black and brown people into schools. Well, you need to remove the question. I've made the same argument with the ABA, the American Bar Association. I put together the first national law school survey working with LSAC, same information. You need to remove this barrier. I don't think there's going to be a bill that will have a more immediate and lasting impact that could benefit the residents of Connecticut than this. Because if you already passed fair chance employment, that's great. But like how many jobs, how many good jobs can you get without any type of technical degree, certificate, or educational degree? Not many, not that many. So they need access to this. We need to have access to this. It's hurting a lot of people. It hurt me personally. And you heard from Grace, the students are all in favor of this. And I'd love to answer. I heard a couple questions earlier. I'd love to answer any other questions that you have. Like I said, like the link that I put in there, trust me, it's stockpiled with research, with one-pagers, with everything you could possibly want to know about this. The one other thing I'll add is that this bill, the Connecticut bill, because I've worked with all the other, with people that were responsible for these bills that passed in other states. Here's my 2 last things. Okay, it's bipartisan. It's a blue state, right? Louisiana, not a blue state. Colorado, not a blue state. They passed it. It works. It works for everyone. Why? Because the economy, you want to help the economy? Get people education. You want to increase public safety? Well, there's studies. There's a study that shows that the more education you get, the lower the recidivism rate. By the time you get a master's degree, the recidivism rate drops to 0%. That's the end of my time, but I'm happy to answer questions again.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there members have any questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't sure who would raise their hand first. Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it, Mr. Tejada. And because of your experience working with the ABA and other legal professional organizations, are there things that we should know, you think we should know about how they view this issue that could help us make a decision?
Yeah, so the ABA worked with the president, it's director of the Center for Racial Diversity there. And so after working on it, we did a conference together, and now they are, I don't think they've released it yet, but they are working on, they're looking into this issue, not just on an educational basis, they're looking at it with the bar admissions practices. So the ABA doesn't actually, they have their own like model rules for professional responsibility. They don't actually control any state bars, but the long story short, they are looking into this and trying to change not just educational requirements, but even the certification, because that would be, that's spoiler alert, that's the next step. You got to remove things that are there that are impeding people to actually get the jobs, right? We want people to get jobs so they don't do crime. And so we got to get them educated. Then we have to remove any issues to get getting through the certification. I did read one of the written testimony of it was a home builders association, and I actually support that amendment that he proposed. And it was like, yeah, we should also have something in there that makes it so that when people are applying, you could ask at a certain point when it's beneficial to the applicant. So a justice impacted person, somebody with background, let's say you have a scholarship that specifically targets them. Let's say it's your NYU Law and you have that scholarship. I know they do because I helped them put that together. You should be able to ask. They're going to need to ask at that point. I don't think that I think the way the law is written now, I think it's perfectly fine. I don't think most schools are going to assume that applies to asking on a college application, but I know this is a long way of answering the question. They're in favor of it. They're highly in favor of it. All the people at the top, a lot of times the issue is they didn't know the issue existed. And once they hear that the issue existed, they're working towards fixing it.
And if just as a follow-up, they see it as potentially a pipeline issue in their own professions is what I am also.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you for your advocacy.
Are there any additional questions? No? Seeing none? Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate your time today. Next up is Manuel Sandoval. He'll be followed by Christopher Montez, who is joining us remotely.
Hello, Senator Slapp, Representative Haddad, Ranking Members Kelly and Haynes, and distinguished members of the Higher Education Committee. My name is Manuel Sandoval. I'm an ACLU Smart Justice leader and advocate. I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 923, an act prohibiting the consideration of criminal history in higher education. The people you ask, the people you serve probably ask, what's so bad about answering a simple question? Or say it's not that bad. Of course, they wouldn't know the feelings and traumas associated with the question unless they've been continually discriminated against. These questions, when asked in any situation, are depleting, defeating, and demoralizing. Not just because the questions are private or because the people asked have experienced trauma, but because most of the time the answer yes comes with a thank you, but we've decided to go with another candidate, or sorry, the apartment's been already rented, or any other reason you can think of when they tell you no. Just imagine how bad it would feel if you hear this after attempting to go for higher education. I asked you, what's the purpose of knowing whether we, the previously incarcerated, have been arrested, incarcerated, or convicted of a crime? If it's not for discrimination purposes, why do they need to know? I can tell you firsthand that the question, if you've been convicted of a crime, has one of the most hurtful experiences I've endured. Like I mentioned before, I've lost countless opportunities despite being told I was a perfect fit for the position. What bearings does a criminal conviction have on whether or not we are accepted into higher education? The only criteria a school should be looking at should be whether or not the student has the capability to complete their program. Wanting more and wanting to better yourself should not come with a stigma. Look at it this way. If I would not be wearing this blue shirt, you wouldn't know I was previously incarcerated, would you? Because I would have led with the fact that I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a professional, right? I would have led with the fact that I graduated summa cum laude. I was a class speaker during both graduations. However, I'm currently being discriminated right now because of our very own government due to my previous criminal conviction. Is that right? All I want to do is help people, but I can't. Why does society insist on hurting one of the most disenfranchised, disengaged, and vulnerable populations? We're tired of being bruised, tattered, and continually oppressed, all in the name of protecting the society. Assisting previously impacted people instead of discriminating against them is protecting and assisting your community. Currently, previously impacted people can be fired, left to be homeless, uneducated, because we're not a protected class. We deserve the right to live in inclusive communities that care without barriers. Senate 923 is only a step in the right direction that can begin to improve the lives of previously impacted residents. Prohibiting Institute of Higher Learning from inquiring about our records will ensure that our previous impact continue to seek higher education. That's why I urge you to support Bill 923. Thank you for your time. Sorry, I was a little nervous.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions by members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your patience. Did you have one comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I know you asked a couple times about the about school, right? So when they're asking, you know, if they can, you know, if a criminal conviction, right? It's hurtful, right? Because we've already done our time, we've done everything that we need to do, right? And now they're choosing to say whether I can move on, whether I can be a doctor, whether I could be a lawyer like Dieter, right? I'm a social worker, right? And even now, I'm not, because they just took away my ability to practice. I've been practicing for the past 2 or 3 years, right? 2.5 years. But they just took that away because the federal government had me on a list that I knew nothing about, right? And now I have to go through Department of Public Health, which should have told me when I was going through the probationary period that they put me under, when they put me to sign contracts and everything, they should have told me, well, you also have to take care of this, but they didn't, right? So now I have to go after the Department of Social Services. I have to go to the Office of Inspector General at a federal level and find out how to get my name off a list so that I can be able to serve my community, right? These are barriers that I shouldn't have. I am more than qualified to serve my community because I have the lived experience that they suffer with every day, okay? And they cannot get my help. And I can guarantee you I'm doing a great job because I got people that were substance use that are no longer on substance because I knew how to communicate with them, all right? And they were in treatment for years and years, but they didn't have someone who understood them, all right? And so I ask you, please, you know, we need to take away all the barriers. We're people. We're not what we were. You know, if anybody is the same person after 30, 40 years, or even 15 years, right? If they're still the same person, then something's wrong, right? But most of us have changed. You have changed. She has changed. Gita's changed. We all change. So we ask, please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the answer to the question. I appreciate that. Last person on our public hearing agenda list is Christopher Montez. He's joining us remotely. Mr. Montez. I think you need to, well, there you go. You've unmuted yourself. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Representative Haddad, Senator Slapp, and members of the Committee on Higher Education. My name is Christopher Montez, and I'm speaking in favor of House Bill 5737. And you've already heard from my colleagues, and you have my written testimony. So I'm just going to make a few points and then fill in with some of the history. This proposed bill, it really is about equity. We are, we have been teaching, I can say I've been teaching for 28 years. I just started my 29th year. And I have well over 200 credit hours. When I see that any other state employee at the college level that's full-time, or someone who's working at least 9 credit hours gets insurance after 10 years, I have to scratch my head and say, wait a minute, that's 180 credit hours. Now I've got more than that. What's the problem, right? So, and my colleagues have already eloquently said that. I just want to speak to that 180 credit hours and the 9 credit hours per semester. In 2004, I believe the Comptroller's Office had issued a memo stating that that was the bar, the 9 credit hours, in order to earn insurance once we retire. We're beholden to that. I don't understand why it has to be 9 credit hours for each semester rather than an aggregate of 180. And I did hear, I believe it was Representative Turco asked if we'd be willing to go to 240 credits, and I suppose that's a starting place to discuss. I've been trying to get this bill passed for, I think, 3 years. Last year, it got amended to include current employees having health insurance. And I didn't want to see that this year. So I'd asked Representative D'Amico to make sure that it just stayed the way it was. So the other thing was the cost. Most of us who are going to retire are going to get on Medicare at 65, are we not? That's 80% of the cost of our healthcare. The state picks up the next 20% if we are given healthcare, or we pay for it ourselves, or we buy insurance. This is not an expensive proposition. It really isn't. And I don't know how many there are who have taught as many credits as I have, or some of my colleagues have, but I don't really think it's a huge amount. And I just ask you to consider this, maybe move it forward, and we can process it some more. And if it goes into the next levels of
3-minute mark, please summarize.
Yeah, if it goes into the next levels of looking at the cost of this, I'm willing to absolutely do the homework to try to help out with that. But I just want to be able to say this again. This is about equity. I just don't understand how backwards, honestly, the current policy is. That's it.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Representative D'Amico.
Surprise, surprise. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Chris, I wouldn't really be doing my job if I didn't ask you just at least one question. And I thank you for your persistence on this issue, and I'm happy to try to assist. I'm not so sure that everyone is happy that I'm being persistent, but I'm going to persist. So in order to make this a little smoother this time around, is there any information that we need to clarify here for either the comptroller's office or for the Office of Fiscal Analysis, so that this bill does not end up with a huge fiscal note, and so that they don't say that it's overly expensive and that it applies to too many people? Could you just kind of speak to that and refine it a little bit for us, just so that there's more clarity?
Certainly. I believe the state needs to take into account what I already said, is that when we retire, we're pretty close to 65 already. And once we reach 65, 80% of the burden is gone from the state of Connecticut. That was not, I think, written in the bills. I think there was a committee on the bill last year, and that wasn't even addressed. It was looking at the cost all over. Someone forgot that at 65 we get Medicare. The other is, I had heard colleagues saying, would you pay in? Yeah, of course. And I think, that's fair, even though, as one of my colleagues said, we've been underpaid for 21 years, or for me for 28 years. Would you pay me back? I thought that was funny. But then again, I want this to pass. So I think going forward, yes, absolutely.
And just finally, just to be clear, your intention is that this applies only to retirees, which I obviously would cut down on the number of people to whom it applies, correct?
Yes, absolutely. This is just for retirees. We're not asking for healthcare right now for all of the employees that are teaching part-time. We're not asking for a raise. We're not asking for anything. We're just saying, give us parity. Give us parity with our colleagues who are working 9 credits per semester. 9 times 20 semesters is 180. If you have 180 credits, then you should be able to get healthcare. It's a simple equation.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Chair, one more question, if I could, just to round it out. So again, as you recall, Chris, one of the objections was that this was going to be too difficult for the great state of Connecticut to be able to calculate. Would you like to speak to that, or should we just leave it alone?
Well, I think they can calculate a lot of things. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out how many adjuncts there are. I know that when I asked HR at CCSU to go back and look at how many credits I've had, they were able to do it in a very, very short amount of time and email it to me. And boom, that was it. So I don't think it's going to be that hard to do. Look, just the Connecticut State University system has a pretty good idea and on actually more than an idea on the record how many of us have X number of credits. It's a simple thing.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Actually, I have one, well, Representative Cooley has a question and I have a quick question as well. Representative Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Professor, for testifying. I just wanted to re-ask the question I asked earlier. It was the bald guy, not Mr. Turco, Representative Turco, who has very nice hair. Regarding increasing the credit requirement to make this more budget friendly and make it more palatable across the board. So 240 is the number I threw out. So you would be willing to look at an adjustment if that's helpful to move this forward?
Yes, I would. I think I have roughly 220, 225, I think I put in my testimony. Yeah, if you need to work some more, I'll do that. Maybe a meeting in the middle of 210, that's smack dab in the middle. But yeah, absolutely. Even though that's, I suppose I could say, well, why don't you then bump up the years of service for the 9 credit people to the same number, say they have to work 12 years or 13 years. That's palatable, right? But just to move this forward, yes. The answer to your question is yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask you a question that probably be more appropriately directed at the state system of community colleges. But as you probably know, it's about the 9 credit limit for per institution, to sort of keep you guys at part-time status. In July, we would anticipate the community college system will be approved for consolidation. Do you happen to know, or have any sort of colleagues know how many adjunct faculty now teach at multiple community colleges? And once consolidated, they might exceed the 9 credit threshold. I guess I'm trying to anticipate something that I hadn't thought about before around what happens when we consolidate 12 separate institutions into a single institution. Currently, adjunct faculty can teach as many credits as they want, I suppose, provided that it's not more than 9 credits at any single institution. That's easy to do at the community college level. There's 12 colleges, but it's system wide. Is that the answer? I'm sorry, I'm getting an answer in the room. Maybe you know. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I believe, since I hired tons of adjuncts when I was at Pear and I was an adjunct, I believe the limit is system wide for the state. So you'll have adjuncts who teach the max allowed. Let's say if they're at Manchester Community, they can't go down to Gateway. So what they end up doing is going to another institution, a post, University of Hartford, Pear, University of New Haven, whatever. But I believe the limitation is system wide for the Connecticut system. So even crossing boundaries between the state colleges.
Thank you for the response. I appreciate that. I don't know if there are any other questions for the speaker. Seeing none, I'll say thank you very much for your testimony. I see Representative Lanu came here just in time to see us adjourn the public hearing. So his timing is perfect, I guess, for attendance sake. But thank you very much. We appreciate your joining us.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is next. What is our next meeting, Madam Clerk? It's next Thursday? A meeting and a public hearing next Thursday. Right. Information will be coming out later today. So I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday. Thank you. This hearing is adjourned.
Yeah, no problem.